frustrating sometimes.
It's okay.
If I end up instead of Janaba during the podcast, can I do ghusl in your bathroom?
He's got a shower down here. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
It's gonna be that easy, huh?
All right. All right. Actually, okay.
He just hears about it.
We're live, actually. All right.
That's fine. They're going to be in for a good surprise, inshallah. This is just warming everything up.
Okay, let's get this show rolling.
So just talking about Kunyaza makes you want to have to take a listen, huh? Or do you actually have to take a listen?
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Mad Mamluks. My name is Sim. Before I introduce anyone, the topics and themes of this podcast and show are not suitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised. I'm being serious about this. You do not want your kids listening to this. And we'll have to reprogram them after.
They will never
this
look
episode.
at you in your eyes again.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. We have a very special show for you guys this afternoon. Help us out on patreon.com/the Madam Lukes. And make sure you click on the old like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Mort, you have something to say, sir?
Yeah, this is just before we get started in this show. And this is just in response or addition to the other show previously to this about the whole school scandal. If anyone out there has comments or concerns, please don't reach out to individuals on the phone. We have an official email address, themadmamlukes@gmail.com. If you want to share something, if you want to complain about something, you can reach through official channels and we'll get back to you on that form. But don't reach out to individuals.
If you have their phone numbers.
Yeah, if you have their phone number and if you...
Because we will not answer it.
Yeah, because we did offer an invitation to people that were supposed to be here or we would have liked to be here. And if you chose not to come on, then we made it official, right? So reach out to the email and we'll be sure to get back to you. But just don't reach out to us privately.
Thank you. All right. Back to more fun topics.
Yeah.
Everyone, thank you for joining again. Make sure you like the show if you haven't done so already. Throw a comment in the comment section related to your questions about what this subject is about. Try to keep it clean. I know sometimes we have fun, but people sometimes get out of hand. And we'll delete your comment if you do that. We have a special guest today. Joining our panel is Mahin Islam. Welcome, Mahin, back to a show that I know I'm switching.
Switch to me.
Yeah, there we go. Mahin has joined, and he cannot let a show like this go without.
Yeah, there was no way in hell I was missing this episode.
Yeah.
Because I think Habeeb actually reached. Our guest today. He messaged me on Instagram. I think the plan was he was supposed to be in Chicago this summer, but I think it didn't work out. But I got my own show and stuff. But I was like, it would do it just. We've talked about our guests on this podcast a couple times. I think last time 18 months ago. Then originally with Kareem Sirajuddin. So I said, you know what, we should do it. It will be do it justice. And plus, and Sheikh Amr will get into there's a relationship that exists with Sheikh Amr and Habeeb from before that. I think it would be more appropriate to do it on Mad Mamluks.
What a guy you are.
You know what I'm saying?
Thank you.
And plus, but this subject is and plus I saw some comment the other day. Somebody was like, "Why is Mahin's picture still on the intro?"
Yeah, well.
So I was like, "Well, you know what? I gotta make an appearance sometime."
Yeah.
So.
Our guest today is a writer, an educator of sex. He's an author of 6 books. Please welcome Habeeb Akande, who was also Sheikh Amar's roommate in Egypt while he was studying there.
Yes. And if I can add to that intro before you begin, Habeeb, Jazakallah khairan for joining us. Habeeb is a talib al-ilm. He's a seeker of knowledge. He's studied the Maliki madhab also. He also studied with shuyukh in Azhar a sharif. So Sheikh Habib knows many matters of the dunya, of the deen also, and he actually chose a path to specialize in what he's going to be discussing today also, amongst many of his specialities.
Yeah, well, what is a good brother, and someone who's pursuing knowledge, how does he get into this subject? Inquiring minds want to know, like, what would possess, because, in Islam, there's like a lot of, it's not that sex is a bad topic, but it's a topic that some people sometimes get queasy about, So maybe you could also talk about that. Welcome to the show, Brother Habeeb.
Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you very much for each and every one of you for inviting me. It's a good question. I get that question quite a lot, but for me, it's somewhat of a strange question. And the reason why I say that is because those who are familiar with the religion of Islam and our sacred history should know that Islam is A, a sex-positive religion, and B, there were a number of scholars in the past, especially in the pre-modern era, who wrote very explicit manuals about teaching men, in particular, the importance of ensuring that their female partners, primarily obviously their wives, are sexually satisfied. And I can list a number of scholars that I'm sure many of us are familiar with, like Jalaluddin Suyuti, who was, funny enough, a Mamluk scholar. So he was a scholar from the 15th century who was known to write over 20 books on sex, intimacy, and eroticism in a genre known as Ulm al-Ba or Ulm al-Nikah, meaning the art of sex or the art of intimacy. So this isn't something that's new. His student as well also wrote books about intimacy and erotology. And also, like I said, and this is something that started in the 9th century or the 3rd century of, like you could say, the Islamic calendar, where scholars such as Al-Jahid, who was a Mu'tazilite, but when he came across a number of the ancient Greeks as well as ancient Indians, who wrote about Greek medicine as well as Indian erotology from their Hindu perspective, a number of the scholars wanted to write books speaking about sex and intimacy and how ultimately to be a good partner for their wives. I mean, they were inspired by these texts as well as being inspired by prophetic traditions, where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know of several hadiths where he informed men to ensure that they are not selfish, selfless in the bedroom. It's not to go to their wives like animals, but to ensure that they send a messenger beforehand. And when the companions asked, "What is this messenger?" the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned, sweet words and kisses. Sorry, and there were many other. And the thing is, we can go into that maybe a little bit later, but for a number of Muslims, they're quite surprised that Muslims or scholars or researchers or intellectuals are writing or speaking about this topic, when I would argue that this is actually part of our tradition. And we've actually, since we were colonized by the Europeans, I would argue that we've adopted more of a Victorian Christian understanding about sex, where we look at sex as just about procreation, whereas the pre-colonial Muslims understood that sex is not just about procreation, but it's about pleasure. So this is and it's about pleasure for both the man and the woman alike. Whereas in a number of our communities and our cultures, we've adopted, like I said, a Victorian Christian understanding where sex is just about procreation and it's just about male pleasure. Whereas a number of the scholars, like I said, such as As-Suyuti and others, they spoke about the importance of female pleasure and the importance of men ensuring that their wives are sexually satisfied, because and there is a number of hadiths that talk about that women's capacity for sexual enjoyment is far greater than a man by 99 parts. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given women a greater degree of modesty, and that's why women don't, they're able to, they've got a greater level of self-restraint compared to men. So it's very interesting, like I said, when I was studying in Egypt, as well as prior to that, and I came across a number of books where scholars, like I said, were speaking very candidly about our rich tradition of erotology. But again, since following colonization, like I said, I'll argue that many of us have adopted somewhat of a Victorian Christian understanding where any talk of sex is considered to be shameful or aib and something that is not befitting of a Muslim. When again, if you look at our history, again, prior to colonization, this wasn't something that was new to our tradition.
Is this something that you were always interested in, that you already had your mind made up before you became a roommate with Sheikh Amr in Egypt? Sheikh Amr had no idea that this was going on in your head? And because I remember when we showed him your book, A Taste of Honey, and he's like, "Oh, I studied with that brother." So we're like, "Oh, you did? That's so crazy." And So I was from that I gathered that he didn't know that you were into all this stuff.
Why do
Yeah,
you say it like it's
so
a
before I
taboo?
had
Wait,
the,
Like, oh, you're into this stuff, like it's something
no, I'm
bad.
just. No, I mean, like sometimes you
He's
wonder.
always had feelings.
Sometimes
Yeah.
when you live with someone, you're supposed to get to know you. They say you get to know them at a much more intimate level, and it would just be. It was so funny that Sheikh Ahmed had no idea you were
I get
into
you,
all
but
this
the way
stuff.
it came out was like, you're into that stuff.
Yeah. Are you recovering from
You're-
this?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Habib.
No, that's a good question. I mean, before I had the honor and the privilege of meeting Sheikh Akbar Al Alama,
The blue-eyed devil.
I am, yeah, a bit of backstory about myself, to be honest. So, born and bred in the UK, Nigerian household, Muslim household, alhamdulillah. But wasn't very practicing, wasn't very religious for most of my adolescence and early 20s. Yes, obviously, I liked women. That was one of the vices, unfortunately, that was quite difficult to kind of stop. But then when I wanted to start practicing the deen a bit more, I kind of adopted more of a very strict, very puritanical approach, because maybe some of the messages that I was going to when I was learning about the deen were very strict and kind of like, women are complete fitna, you shouldn't be anywhere near them or even converse with them and this, that, and the other. So I kind of had that kind of somewhat of a attitude when I really started to take the deen a bit more seriously. And then when I went to Egypt in 2006, and then I came across, like I had read about, again, this, before going to Egypt, I read a book called Sexuality in Islam by Abdul Wahab Boudiba, which was a book that was translated from French into English, where he spoke about Islam's rich tradition. So I was quite intrigued that, okay, why isn't this spoken about like a number of like the books that I've read that were translated Arabic? How come they don't really talk about this apart from this particular book? So I was kind of aware of Islam's heritage in this particular regard, but again, it wasn't something that a number of will kind of really talk about. It was really just a case of maybe just talking about maybe like marriage and stuff like that. Whereas a number of the scholars of the past, they didn't only speak about marriage, they spoke about sex. And when I mean by sex, they spoke about sexual pleasure, because there's a big difference between the two. So if you look at a lot of contemporary Muslim scholars who write about like intimate relations or male-female relations, it's normally about love, it's normally about marriage and things like that. Whereas prior to colonization, they spoke about sex and pleasure and female orgasm and this, that, and the other. So I was quite intrigued at what happened. Why did this shift change? I did have some discussion with some people, some of my roommates. I think maybe I was too shy to kind of speak in front with Sheikh Ahmed with his piercing blue eyes. Once he sees you kind of
They're green. They're not blue, brother.
put your head down and kind of, he's got this. But in all honesty, he has a lot of hate, to be honest. If I'm honest with you, and I probably was more shy to kind of maybe have those kind of discussions with him, because he probably was thinking, this dirty pervert from London, this kind of into a household kind of thing. If I'm complete, but I did have discussions like with Abdul Kabir. I was, I mean, I can say it now, but at the time I planned, provided that Allah spared my life and gave me good health, I wanted to write about 10 books. I've got a number of books that still I'm planning to write. So that was one of the topics. And I did, like I said, discuss it with some people, but some people maybe I just thought might not be as interested as others. So it's not something that it's not something that's fairly new, but with some people maybe I thought were more interested in the topic than others. Not to say that Sheikh Ahmed wasn't interested in the topic, but he was and still is obviously a very serious person. So the same way I'm comfortable talking to people who are comfortable, people who maybe they might think, okay, this guy needs a bit of issues or we need to pray for him, I might not kind of bring that up in the kind of conversation.
So if I can just chime in, if I can defend myself here
before you say
about
that
the
seriousness, this guy's a complete goofball. He's exposing his chest hair as well today for this episode.
Bro.
It's on full display.
Can I chime in on that? And I did actually say to Sheikh Ahmed when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, and this is one of the things that I've been watching your podcast avidly for over 4 or 5 years, and
thank you, man.
I love the work, and may Allah continue to put tawfiq and work because you are benefiting a lot of people more than you kind of realize. And one of the things that I did say to Sheikh Ahmed, and I'll say it publicly, that I loved and appreciate about this podcast is the chemistry between the 4 of you, or the 3 of you, without my hate now. But and also one of the things I think is really refreshing is that you humanize someone who is ultimately a vessel of sacred knowledge, which is Sheikh Ahmed. Because I think it's one of the things as Muslims, sometimes we look at religious figures or sheikhs or talib al-ilm and they're just one way, but it's very serious. Whereas I think it's good that we see like his personality and others as yours. Obviously, I know that a number of you have also studied and you know about the deen, but I think it's good that we see not just like a very, because that was the image I had about religious people when I was kind of growing up, and that's what kind of maybe why I didn't really want to. I thought maybe not really. I always believed, but practicing, I just thought religious people look too serious. But seeing again, like I said, the dynamics of your podcast, and again, there's humor, but there's also intellectualism, and there's also just, speaking about Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, speaking about the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, as well as speaking about popular culture. You can relate to more people than I think you realize, and I think maybe I didn't see that much of a side with Sheikh Ahmed because I think in the beginning it was quite serious.
Yeah.
In the room, in the because it was a wonderful. Don't get me wrong, it's not like we was just spoke about studies, but yeah, I think maybe if I was spend more time and the nur of Sheikh Ahmed was
I knew there was something coming. Okay,
then maybe I might have seen more of that side.
Let me clear my name, okay, real quick. So, number one, look, so Habeeb, I'm going to talk a little bit about him. I know he probably doesn't want me to say this, but I've lived with, in all of my travels, alhamdulillah, with over like 70 roommates altogether. Because sometimes it was 4 people at a time. No. Sometimes it was 3. When I was in Mauritania, I used to live in this huge room with 10 Senegalese brothers. I was only Indian there, so I learned a little bit of language too. But I had, like, in all of my travels, and I'll tell you that I've never met anyone more punctual in my life than Habeeb. That's why when he was coming out with these books, I knew that he was going to do it in a very, in the best practice way possible, if that makes any sense, because I know how committed he is. I know how early he used to wake up in the morning. I'm not getting too much detail, Habeeb, but I know how punctual he was. And when I saw somebody younger than me that was as serious as him, I was like, yo, I gotta raise my bar a little bit too. You know what I'm saying? That happens. We bounce off of each other that way. Yeah, there were times where we were goofy and like he would just smile at me, like I thought he was smiling at me like, oh, this big buffoon. Why is he acting like a weirdo? But a very genuine brother. I met some of his friends too. Remember some of your, I think, cousins came and lived with us too for a little bit. Those brothers, I remember those brothers were really, really good brothers too. I know his cousin or uncle. I can't remember the relationship. But me and Habeeb, we had a great time together, and I really mean that. I don't even think we ever had like a single dispute. That's how easy he is to live with. You know what I'm saying? But he's a man of principle too, right? He'll have like, and when we used to have our conversations, there was a lot of it. Yeah, because we were there in the zone of like talab al-ilm, we have to get this done. We're missing our families. We got to get this done. We got to get this done. But how long was it? Was it like 8 months we probably lived together? Almost a year together? I can't remember.
Honestly, and I'm not just saying this, it was, even though it was a year, it felt like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah,
and I still hold fondly to the memories that we had. And I'm not just saying this, obviously, because you're here, in all seriousness. We didn't have a television in the flat. There was no, I don't think anyone even had a laptop. There was no like smartphones. So it was really just a case of studying. Yeah. And then sometimes obviously we eat together. Especially like on Fridays, one of us in the flat will kind of cook and we eat together, and we have a lot of engaging conversations that I still remember today fondly. And the thing is that, I mean, I wish I could. Sometimes I wish I was able to kind of film some of the interactions and even maybe blog, because it's something that, and I'm not saying this for, if people have a taste of it, they would, inshallah, they would want to kind of also maybe go and study as well. And that's something that I definitely did appreciate. So even though it was only like less than a year, the conversations that we had, the genuine brotherhood that I felt, it was something that, like I said, is something that, I think it was definitely a big blessing from Allah.
So I have a question. Did you have the privilege of smelling Sheikh Amar's vinegar bath, whatever, apple cider vinegar? He used to do this thing where he
had these herbal remedies.
Hold on. So when I got to Egypt the first day, I had like this sore throat, and he's like, I know the best antibiotic known to man. And he was like, it's
antiviral, but yeah,
it's oregano oil. So he gives me like this bottle of, mixed with oregano oil. And he's like, take it under your tongue, take a few drops here. And I woke up feeling worse than the first day. I'm like, just take me to the pharmacy. I'm going to get some antibiotics.
It's because you're not used to it, bro. So it felt like that.
Whatever. Anyways, and then I come home from the pharmacy and this house is stinking. Like, I mean, it's smelling horrible. Imagine like hot, musky water mixed with like apple cider vinegar. Because anyone who hasn't been to Egypt knows that the water is like 70% chlorine. Like, if you get into this thing, like, you're coming out ashy. Like, it doesn't matter what you are, you're coming out ashy. And so here's Amr like bathing in like this apple cider vinegar, and it smelled so bad. And I don't know if you had the pleasure of smelling that wonderful musky scent from Sheikh Amr.
I don't recall that. I do recall when
Alhamdulillah, you didn't have to go through that.
You do recall what? What'd you say, Habib?
I recall when Sheikh Ahmed used to bless the bathroom after eating. I do remember. Yeah.
Hey, I'm glad you called it blessing though. So,
let's get right into it. Sheikh, why do you think so many people, or men specifically, have a problem with the female anatomy? Specifically, like what you focus on related to orgasms and etc.
Sorry, who's the question
No,
addressed?
it's for you. Why do you think?
I'm not sure.
Why? Let's just call you Dr. Love. Okay?
Dr. Love.
No.
Dr.
Yeah,
Love.
that's good, Dr. Love.
Love doctor.
You gotta say in a Barry White voice though, Dr. Love.
No, you gotta call him a love doctor.
So,
Love doctor.
yeah. Why are so many men clueless about this?
A number of things. I think bravado. I think as men we have got a natural bravado that we think we know it all, and sometimes we don't want to humble ourselves both metaphorically and like literally in front of our wife in terms of understanding the body. Again, for us in terms of, again, without making this like a biology lesson, in order for a man to reach climax, it's very easy. Humping away less than like a minute or two, you're going to climax very easily and you're going to be satisfied. Whereas in order to understand the female anatomy and understand that there's different ways to bring a woman to climax, and it's not just about penetrative intercourse. And even when I like let a lot of guys know that most women don't climax via intercourse alone, that you need to ensure that you're maybe stimulating the clitoris and getting to know the clitoris. Some men don't know what the clitoris is. A number of men don't know the difference between the clitoral hood and the clitoral glands. And then there are also some men, for whatever reason, find the female anatomy to somewhat distasteful. Now, if you're someone who is
that a double meaning?
excuse me.
Distasteful?
Oh,
Sorry.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
No, I was.
Jokes.
No, it's not a joke. I need to know for sure what he's talking about.
I was gonna come to that.
Okay.
But come.
If there is someone who is a fan of drinking from the fairy cup, shall we say? Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you use that in America, but like cunnilingus, that's a more professional term.
Professional.
There are a number of women who are very uncomfortable, and like this on the series, are very uncomfortable with their anatomy in terms of the way it looks, the way it smells, and the way it tastes. Now, again, as a man, especially if you want to bring your wife to climax, you should be able. You should. It's important that you reassure her, and you have. It's important that you understand. I'm not saying you necessarily need to go and watch and see different types of female anatomies, but generally, the anatomy that we see, even on science books or medical books, is of a vulva that is symmetrical. So like the labia minora, which are the vulva lips, they kind of really look like they I don't want to say perfect, but they look like this kind of perfect genitalia. And a number of most women's genitalia does not look like that. So a number of women that they've got asymmetrical genitalia, things like that. And sometimes again, this is what can cause body dysmorphia, or some women to feel very insecure about the way they look, especially down below. So that's why even as a man, even you might be somewhat thinking that, you know, the genitalia doesn't look right because of what you've been exposed to, either by way of porn or what you've maybe seen in previous encounters. So that's why it's important that you understand that the genitalia, the female genitalia, comes in different shapes, sizes, and forms, and all of them are completely normal. And again, most importantly, that you reassure your wife that she's perfectly normal. And then again, especially if you're performing cunnilingus or other activities, that again, you don't make her feel insecure or anything about her body, because there are a number of men who, from what I've been told, who go down on their wife, and then they might react horribly, or especially if it's the first time they're intimate, and say like, "What's that?" And that can horribly. This is it's something which, again, I'll put on the other way around. Imagine, I'm speaking hypothetically, so I'm not speaking about anyone's like personal lives. Imagine, you're there and I'm just saying you, but I'm not directing this to anyone here.
Bro, it's all good, bro. Just say
First
it,
time
bro.
intimate, your wife says, like, you pull down your pants, your trousers, and she says, "Is that what you've got?" That will probably destroy you.
Yeah.
Or if when you're intimate, even after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, your wife was to say that that you've never actually brought me to climax. So you're walking around thinking that you're the man, this and the other, and she tells you that she's been faking it for like God knows how many years. And this is a reality that unfortunately that a number of men do also find it quite difficult to process because, like I said, because we've got the ego and our bravado, and we assume that male sexuality works the same way as female sexuality when they're very different. And again, a lot of these wisdom, shall we say, that the scholar spoke about, they were deriving this from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because if you look at the hadiths where the Prophet is speaking, advising men how they should treat their women, compared to the hadiths where the Prophet is advising women how they should be with their husbands in terms of sexual relations, with women it's generally a case of do not withhold intimacy, do not use sex as a weapon, like make sure if he asks for sex, do not refuse him, right? Because generally with men we're very easy for us to be satisfied in that way. Whereas with the men, the hadiths when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is advising men, they're more intricate, and he's speaking to the Arabs and using metaphors in something that they can understand. Is in don't go on your wife like an animal. Send a messenger, like wonderful, beautiful euphemisms, because the approach that a man has to be with his wife, with a woman, is totally different from a woman with a man. So that's why, if anything, it's something that more I would have thought that, especially if you're a man who likes women, you like to satisfy your wife, you would have an interest in wanting to understand that she is sexually satisfied. Whereas I think for a number of men, we take more pride in seeking validation and approval from our male peers rather than the woman that we're laying with.
So I want to pin something that you said. You talked about faking, like where you see. Is it, in your experience, is it a common phenomenon where, a dude will be married for like 10, 15, 20 years, and then his wife tells him, like, oh yeah, I never liked it. I just faked it and stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, how prevalent is that in your experience?
It's extremely common. I mean, I work with Muslims and non-Muslims. It's the same across the board. People that have been in long-term relationships or married for 10, 15, 20 years, and maybe the wife at this time then feels a sense of, either because maybe she's frustrated and she's had enough and she just actually wants to kind of voice her concerns, or because she might have been seeing or hearing what other women actually going through, and she realized I've actually been living a lie kind of thing. And one of the things, especially when I speak, especially to other counselors or sex therapists, when women come with these concerns or issues, it's a difficult one to broach, because I always try to help them understand from the man's perspective. Because if the man, obviously, he's fulfilling his duty as what he should be doing in terms of providing financially and also what he thinks in the bedroom, and then all of a sudden, after 10 years, 5 years, however many years, you now bring this onto him, it can really deflate him. So that's why I tell women, it's how you even communicate that message to him, because essentially you've been living a lie. And there's different reasons why women do that. Some, again, is to preserve the man's ego. Some is because they don't know their anatomy in and of itself. But I think it's important that women understand that the same way they might have been faking it because they want to preserve his ego. I think in some cases they need to be able to communicate in a way where they're not damaging his ego, because it can be so destroying if you're hearing, after like 10 years, 5 years, or what have you, that your wife says that she's never experienced an orgasm. And it's very common, and I don't think it's not something, again, men naturally are going to share with their male friends, and I don't expect them to, but it's not as uncommon as people think. And that's because, like I said, a number of women don't know their bodies. It's not something, like, a lot of women do not know their bodies. A lot of women have not even looked at genitalia.
Oftentimes, a lot of brothers who've had multiple sexual partners, they say that certain ethnicities are more inclined to having orgasms in the bedroom. Is there any truth to the fact that there's certain women of certain ethnicities having a better sensation or better time in the bedroom than others?
More receptive to pleasure, yeah, right?
That's a very good question. I'll first talk from one thing I read from a classical scholar, and I'll talk about that contemporary situation. So one of Asyuti's students who wrote a book, Tashnif al-Asma fi Shari Ahkam al-Jimal, which is a book about explaining like the rulings in relation to sexual intimacy, and he kind of pined from a lot of what Asyuti mentioned in his books. One of the things that he found, because like I mentioned earlier on, is that a number of the Muslims scholars they delved into eritology from finding out what the ancient Greeks had written about this topic, as well Greek medicine as well as the Indian eritologists, like the Hindu eritologists. And he mentioned that the Indians or the ancient Indians are the best at this particular topic in terms of, because even when we talk about the Kama Sutra, unfortunately, it's been bastardized in the West because a number of people, when they think about the Kama Sutra, they think it's a book about sex positions, when only like 25% of the book actually deals with sex positions. It's about love, it's about intimacy, it's about pleasure. And when they were speaking about like sex positions, and this is what even the Muslim scholars took from the ancient Indians, it was about genital compatibility. So if you're a man and you are relatively well endowed, and your wife is not so, in terms of her, the vagina is not as necessarily deep, there may be certain positions that might suit. And likewise, again, if you're a man that's relatively, you've got a small member, and then your wife is more expansive, shall we say, there might be certain members that might be better for her in terms of especially to stimulate the clitoris or the interior of the vagina and things like that. So this is something that he said that um, this particular scholar, that the ancient Indians, they were very they're well versed in understanding the nuances of sex and understanding that again it's not just the same. Now, coming to your point about if someone has multiple sexual partners, does that mean is it down to ethnicity? I'm quite uncomfortable with that because it can feed into racial stereotyping, and this is something that a number of the West they like to kind of do, like they like to, especially when they came in contact with, West Africans, and they were saying that like the men are this way and the women are this way and they're more hypersexual, this and the other, and they said the same about the Muslims as well. So I don't really want to say it's because necessarily of their ethnicity, but it might be because of their culture. So if you come from a culture where you are encouraged to, so for example, Rwanda, for example, with the Kunyaza tradition, the men are encouraged from a relatively young age. You're not a man until your wife not only has an orgasm, but also ejaculates or squirts. That's their cultural tradition. So men are going to do everything within it humanly possible to understand the female anatomy and to ensure that she feels comfortable, she feels safe, and she feels pleasured. And then women, on the other hand, they're taught from a relatively young age that you're entitled to pleasure. You can initiate intimacy, and then you should feel comfortable to speak to your husband in terms of this doesn't work for me, do this, do that. So it's not that it's because they are necessarily Rwandese that they can orgasm more or squirt more. It's because they've got a culture which is more, you could say, female orientated or more pleasure positive. Whereas if you look at another culture which is more about just procreation, and the men are quite selfish and they're not attentive to the woman's needs, then you probably will see that women in that particular country are less likely to orgasm than others. So that's why I just think that it's important, especially when we're looking at historical texts or looking at different cultures, whether you're an anthropologist or sociologist, you take that into consideration because people, like I said, will use this to kind of racially stereotype and say, these people are more, because even like common issues that we have nowadays, that especially amongst a number of Muslims and women, like with vaginismus, it's unfortunately quite common.
With what? What was that? What was that you said?
Vaginismus.
What is that?
Vaginismus is it's an involuntary contraction of the vagina where it makes not only sexual intercourse but any form of penetration, even if a woman's using a tampon, extremely difficult, if not impossible. So it's where a woman, without even realizing it, she just can't, she doesn't feel comfortable to open up. So even if a man is trying to penetrate, it's going to be extremely painful, if not impossible. And this is something that is unfortunately quite prevalent in a number of, especially conservative Muslim communities, with women who've never engaged in any form of intimacy before. And one of the reasons, in this, it's more of a psychological issue rather than a physical one, is because a lot of women, they've grown in a culture where they've just been shamed about their body, shamed about sex. Even when they get married, for them, they've got this idea that, if I have sex, I'm still going to be like a bad girl. This is not something that is befitting of me. This is something, even within a halal relationship, it's something that, again, it's something that now, alhamdulillah, there's more, because again, this is something that women should be teaching other women, that Muslim women in particular are doing great work kind of helping unpack these psychological barriers that a number of Muslim married women are facing, where there's women who've been married for 2-3 years and the man has been unable to consummate the marriage. And it's a very difficult, obviously, conversation to have with in-laws and things like that. But it's because if you're reared in a society where, and again, even if you look at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know what is halal and what is haram, okay? But they didn't have this like if you have sex, you become like you're defiled as a person. Even if someone falls into zina, and we ask Allah to protect us and to forgive us
I mean,
for any sins that we've committed, it doesn't make you like lesser of a person. A beautiful story that I came across when one of the companions went to Umar bin Khattab, and he said that his daughter, prior to Islam, she committed no, after she became a Muslim, she committed zina, but she was very like agitated and worried, and she was wanted to kill herself. But then the father saved her and obviously told her like he looks after her. And then he went to Umar bin Khattab and then he said, someone's asked for my daughter's hand in marriage. Should I tell the person who proposed her about her past? And then Umar said, if you do that, I'll make an example of you. Marry her
SubhanAllah.
like a chaste woman.
SubhanAllah.
So the attitude that even as Muslims that we have many, not saying, but many that we have even towards like sex, and if a woman commits a sin, especially for women in particular, they're somewhat defiled forever. And even if a woman is even in a halal relationship and married, some women they've been grown up, they've been raised to believe that sex is inherently bad. And I would argue this is from Victorian Christianity. It's not from Islam. Because when you look at our tradition, and that's why so many Muslims find it quite shocking that the Prophet ﷺ said this scholar said this. They didn't have that attitude that we have nowadays. Even to like even how we think about paradise and things like that. This idea of Islam being a very rigid religion and has a very sex negative approach towards sexuality, I'll argue that's definitely not the case. But it's definitely the case for a number of Muslims, unfortunately, the way we view Islam, even like paradise. I'll ask the question: when was the last time you heard a scholar or a talk really speaking about the pleasures of paradise in terms of like the pleasures that both men and women are going to engage in terms of sexual intimacy? And these are questions that the companions clearly asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Are we going to have intimacy in the hereafter? Are we going to approach our wives like we approach our wives in the dunya? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam answered this question. So if we are uncomfortable with this topic, is it that the religion is the issue, or is it us ourselves? And I'll argue it's the latter, because we are not more pious or better than.
It's nurture, not nature. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think as far as ethnicity, I think it's a lot more to do with culture, and the reason for that is because in certain cultures, you don't talk about it at all. It's something dirty, and if you're brought up with this idea that it's dirty, you're never comfortable with it. And then I think that coupled with the fact that people are getting married later, they're exposed to haram. It is what it is, right? And they may watch pornography and things like that, and sex is not what porno is. Like it's not the same thing, right? It's very different. Porno is staged. It's fake, right? It's meant to be hyper erotic, right? But sex is not that way.
But
sometimes
if you're squirting in it though, is that like real?
Still, even that's fake.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they fake that.
Do they have like a water balloon or something?
Yeah, they have all kinds of tools, but they fake that stuff. But my point being though is that if you are using that to compare to like to your own experiences, you're gonna feel like either A, you haven't done a right job, or B, there's something wrong with that person, right? And I think even it's probably more psychological for women than it is men, but men to a degree is psychological as well, right? And if you're psychologically not in the right space for it, you're not gonna enjoy it. Right? I mean, and I think that's the problem that they have. Like two things, like culture and then what they're exposed to. It's not reality.
Yeah.
Right? And then that coupled all together, it just makes it a whole awkward situation for them.
Yeah. No, and if I can add to this, Habeeb, I want you to chime in after this too, inshallah. So I think a lot of this, like you're saying, it starts from nurture and not nature, this thing of shame and this almost hatred of yourself, of having sexual feelings, because that's what happens to a lot of people. I've seen this where they're like, why am I such an evil person? Why am I desiring to do this with, even like when they talk about their wives, right? Why am I desiring to have this type of sexual intimacy with my wife, right? So one thing that we have to start from the beginning, I've been saying this for a very long time, as many opportunities I can get, is number one, the confusion that people have as far as there's a time and place for everything. Even within that, there's confusion when it comes to sexual relations. A time and place doesn't mean that you're hush-hush about sexuality, and then when it's time for marriage, then you just give them a crash course, or you just don't tell them and say, oh, they're going to learn, because that's going to make it even worse. What we do is in Islam, when we teach our children fiqh, and we go through the bab of tahara, the chapter of tahara, tahara is almost overwhelmingly in many places, you have to talk about ghusl, you have to talk about sex, you have to talk about, even like, for instance, when we talk about wudu, what requires wudu, what requires ghusl, right? If the penis just touches the vagina, does it require wudu? When the head of the penis, إذا غابت الحشفة, when the head disappears into the vagina, وجب الغسل, right? Then you have to do ghusl. But when we're teaching that, we're not just making it very legal, illegal also, because that still doesn't make the student comfortable. We still have to talk about the adab. That's where fiqh and tazkiyat, the nafs, purification of the soul, and adab, where you make this literal marriage between legality of sex and its ahkam and its rulings, and the best practices and the best way to conduct yourself. So advice to parents is when hopefully you're going to be the one that's teaching your child fiqh about sex, because they have to hear about it from you, right? At least in the beginning. If there's certain rulings you don't know that are fine, intricacies, that's fine. There's many manuals, many books of fiqh out there that are very easy to read to let you know the basics very, very well, right? But and the reason why I say this, a lot of parents, I have parents that come to me and say, hey, can you teach my children about, puberty and stuff like that? I tell them, listen, your children have to learn it from you. They came from you. They came from between your loins. I mean, you're the best person to tell them. Like, what is with the relationship that you're not... So, but the time and place thing is, yes, it still has to be conducted in a noble way. You're not going to be talking about like erotic and pornographic vernacular with your children and teaching them this vernacular, right? But you have to let them feel comfortable that this is just a part of life, and this is a part of marriage. This is one of the main reasons why we get married. But and then you continue with the chapters of fiqh. They're very, very easy to absorb, especially the way they're written in English now. And then you take a little break from that, and then you tell them the adab of how sex works, how you're supposed to prepare yourself, what you're supposed to do, and be very merciful. Like Rasulullah said, don't approach, your wives like animals, right? In that sense. And even talking about positions, like, Habeeb, and he was talking about this, and I read this in some of his books. Obviously, he gets into some of the psychological aspects of this. And imagine how much your children will respect you, that if you explain to them the verse when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that your wives are a tilth for you, right? فَأْتُوا حَرْثَكُمْ أَنَّ شِئْتُمْ. Come to your tilths, and look how beautifully Allah explains it with such dignity, but everybody knows what Allah is talking about, right? And Allah is talking to us, all of us, in such a dignified way, which means we talk to it with our children in a dignified way also, right? And obviously you don't have to tell them tilth. You can explain. Nobody even uses that word anymore, right, when it comes to sex. But when you explain that to them, why was it even revealed, right? The people of Mecca, when they made hijrah, they married the women, the Ansari women, right? And the men of Mecca were used to all different types of positions in sex, everything except for anal sex, obviously, right? And the women complained to Rasulullah because the Medinan women were only used to what we call the missionary position, where the man is on top, the woman's on the bottom, and penetration occurs that way, right? But when they were marrying these women, they were doing all types of different positions. And the Medinan women were not used to this, so they came to Rasulullah. And they said, these men, they're doing it like this, and they're doing it like that. And some of them also complained, which another verse was revealed for, they're very violent in the way they're doing it, right? And so when this verse was revealed, Allah is telling them, you can do it in any position that you want. There's no one way to do it, as long as you don't have anal sex, right? And that's a whole different conversation. But we have to be able to, when we teach the fiqh to our children, and it should be coming from parents, we also have to teach them the adab. And if you're in a position of giving premarital counseling, do not leave the sexual portion out of premarital counseling. Because if you leave this portion out, you've taught them everything, and then you've added to the shame of sex when they're about to get married. So number one, you were entrusted to teach them what to do on their wedding night and how to continue that relationship in a healthy manner. And yes, it's supposed to be fun, it's supposed to be enjoyable, and you're supposed to want to have it, but with the condition of being married. After you're married, you can do anything you want. So Allah didn't stipulate a condition of not enjoying too much or too little. Allah didn't stipulate that. Allah is saying you can come to them in any position you want, husband and wife. They can have any type of sexual intercourse they want, as long as they are married. After that, it's nobody else's business what you do in the bedroom, right?
Yeah, I just want to come back to Habeeb real quick because he mentioned about the whole thing about licking, right? About the women,
Yeah.
right?
Can
But-
we get a camera on Maheen real quick? He's so happy right now.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, but the thing is like this, and I think this is going to come back to what we were
Like
just
salivate,
speaking
actually.
about. What we were speaking about earlier was that the culture, right? Like for example, there's certain scholars who will tell you, well, why would someone want to do that when you use that tongue to recite the name of Allah?
Yeah.
Right, and so like and like I mean I'm of the opinion that it's all good, right? But some people are like, no, it's disgusting. It's something that A'udhu billah, like you say the the shahada with that tongue, right? And so when you hear these things, right, the brothers are like confused. They're like, well, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I mean, is it something that you should, and vice versa, right? For the woman to the man, right? The whole oral thing. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's actually Jazakallah khairan for asking that question. That's definitely one of my favorite subjects.
Nice.
My man.
As some, no, and that was something that also perplexed me because, like you said, Morris, that was something that I would listen to some sheikhs that, respectable sheikhs, respectable da'is, and they would say, like, how could you, go down on your woman like that? It's disgusting, it's nasty. And then some will say, but I can't say it's haram.
Yeah.
Some scholars would say it's only the practice of dogs. Some scholars would even say things like
It's makruh. Yeah.
it's not something that the Muslims did. It's only until we came across the West because of pornography and things like that. And again, that's why I was just thinking, if you actually read our texts in terms of our historic texts, you had scholars as far back as one of the students of Imam Malik Asbagh, who explicitly mentioned that you can even lick your wife's clitoris. And it was something that Imam Qurtubi, who was a famous scholar from Islamic Spain, Andalusia, he mentioned that as well. And the reason why he mentioned that, and again, it's important that people understand the context. So during obviously the time of, I'm now talking like around like the 9th century or the 3rd century of the Islamic period, you had in Baghdad, you had a number of fabricated hadiths that were proliferating. And one of the hadiths that was proliferating that the Prophet ﷺ was reported to have said, but the hadith is not authentic, is that if you look at your wife's genitals, it causes blindness. So then you had some people asking, like in Medina, is it allowed to look at my wife's genitalia? And then you had Asbagh who responded and said, yeah, it's perfectly fine. It's even allowed to lick her clitoris. Yeah. And then also you had another scholar, Tabi'i, A'ta bin Rabah, who was a student of Ibn Abbas and Aisha, may Allah be pleased with them, as amongst another. He also mentioned that it's perfectly fine to lick, and explicitly said to lick the clitoris. And there's several examples, like I said, and this is like from the time of the Salaf, so this isn't like a new phenomenon. But again, when you look at a number of the scholars who speak about some of these practices like oral sex after colonization, it's the attitudes change. So that's why, again, it's understanding the content. So it's like I can see, again, if someone is uncomfortable with it, if someone doesn't want to do it, that's fine. But one thing that kind of really disappointed me is that if someone is asking a legal ruling like a fatwa, I'm not asking whether you do it. I'm not asking your opinion. Right. I'm just saying, what is Islamic ruling? And if you look at, like I said, a lot of the scholars of the past, like Imam Malik, he would say, the people of our time or before would rarely say something's halal and haram unless it's clear. Yes. If it's something we don't like, something we might say, I wouldn't do that. I don't advise you to do that. So if they think, maybe it's something that is makruh or not something from their culture, maybe they'll advise against it. But nowadays, people are quick to say something is haram. Again, it might be something that you're not comfortable with, that's fine. But to say that it's the practice of the dog, so it's not something that is part of the good akhlaq of a Muslim. Maybe because I was in an age when I was reading these, I was able to kind of contextualize, understand, maybe I see where it's coming from. I don't necessarily agree with it. Because even people that say it's haram, there's no clear I've come across.
No, I mean, I'm with you on that. I mean, because like that could be argument could be made for a lot of things, right? Like, oh my God, like how you're urinating with your penis, and you also give sperm to your child. A wonderful thing happens from the woman's vagina, right? I mean, you could make so many things. I just think that it's something almost natural when it comes to sex for most. I mean, at least for most people that I know of, right? And I get it. Urf might be different from custom to custom, from person to place, or whatever. I get that, but to me, I think it's very explicit in the Quran that just don't do the anal, right? Like that's just the thing. Everything, you're supposed to enjoy each other, and maybe that's a part of enjoyment, right? And especially when we're talking about climax, right? What else is a man going to do to build to that point, right? I mean, our default is to insert, right? I mean, and how do you get to the point of inserting if you're not engaging in that foreplay,
Plus,
right?
if 70% of women aren't orgasming through vaginal intercourse,
Yeah.
you're left with two options.
Yeah, you're right. You're
And
right.
then if you take away mouth, and you know, like, your fingers can get tired, man. I
Yeah.
mean, that's like
Well,
you
your
know what
mouth
I'm
can get
saying?
tired too, but
I mean,
No, you're very right. And if I can just add to what Habib said, very, very importantly, even on the level of Sharia, yes, you have to be very, very clear. Now, if somebody, what Habib said was actually very important, where if somebody just doesn't want to do it because they're actually disgusted by it. Let's say a husband and wife are actually disgusted by it, then that's fine. But that's not ruling. That's not hukum shari'i, right? Because there's a matter that we also have to take
But don't you think that's a problem,
consideration.
though? Like-
no. I'll tell you why. There's
no,
a matter.
why they're disgusted by it. Like, I want you to get to that later because
No, I'm
that
going to get
goes
to it
back
right
the
now.
mindset.
That's
Okay,
not going to
right.
get into it.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a matter in the Sharia that we have to take into consideration, which is Amr Jibilli. Jibilli is something that you just cannot control. You're hardwired to not like something. Some people, for instance, don't like cheese, okay? I'm not making any relation here, right? But some people just don't like a certain type of blue cheese, goat cheese. They're like, I just can't stand it. I know it's good for me, but it's just disgusting to me. But you can eat it if you want, right? Same thing with Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam when the people ate the lizard, right? He said, I don't eat it, but you can, right?
Sure.
Which means you can't say that it was haram because it's disgusting to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam because he clarified, right? And the same thing goes, like, there's some people who just despise the way maybe the vagina smells, or the way a woman may despise putting her mouth on a penis, and it just really like irks her, right? We're gonna say that's specific for those people, but just because they are disgusted by it doesn't mean it's Islamically haram.
Sure.
Right? Because there's some people, like, literally they just don't like the way it smells, either were men and women, right? Whatever the case is.
it could just be urf, right? It's not their custom to do it, and they don't view sex that way.
So can we cover that in the premarital So here's the thing: you touched upon like sex ed and premarital counseling.
Yeah.
Same. Remember, like 4 years ago on this podcast, I asked somebody about like having premarital like sex counseling, and they like got super triggered. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So I would like Habib to expound upon like what kind, like I feel like what you're the stuff you're educating people on, right? There has to be a system like that gets integrated in our current systems as far as premarital counseling, because I think premarital counseling does not cover this at all, like, or it's very rarely touched upon. And then like basic things like you can't ask. Cause I remember that question I asked on this podcast 4 years ago to this guest was like, because her response was like, how do you, if you're thinking about it, you're watching too much porn. I'm like, listen, you have to ask the idea, like, you haven't tried nothing, but are you open to the idea of giving a blowjob? Like, that's a very frank question, but you can't ask it without being called a pervert. And then, you know, and like if you're keeping it halal, you're going in the marriage with certain expectations. Because listen, like, people will be like, well, how do you know about it? I'm like, listen, you grew up in America or the UK or wherever at public schools. Dudes are talking about getting head all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's very inexperienced of the person to ask somebody who's asking about an Islamic ruling. That person's not qualified to talk about that. If somebody's asking, you don't say, "Oh, have you been watching porn?"
Yeah.
Oh, well, are you a pervert? That's the worst
that was the
way.
response, yeah.
That person should not be talking about sexuality in Islam, because that's not how the scholars dealt with it classically.
Right.
And even if some of them did, we're open. It's easy for us to say, you know what, they erred in the way that they dealt with people.
Right.
That's fine. There's nothing wrong with
Because
that.
culturally speaking, in America, like, you go to public schools, like stuff like usually it starts in 6th, 7th grade, right? That's usually when the dudes and girls start experimenting through like giving head and whatnot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, we're exposed to it. Let's be real, right? And so if you're staying away from it, but then you're like, oh, that's, you know, and dudes are saying like, yo, you got to get some head.
Yeah.
You know, so you're like, okay, when I get married, I want to get some of that, you know? And then you can't ask about it, and then you get married, and you're like, your wife's like, you know, and that was different if she goes down on you and it's like, it smells like Fritos onion rings. You know what I'm saying? You got to clean your joint up, you know?
Yeah.
That's different. I'm saying assume you got to take care of yourself and make sure that stuff is like cleaned up and smells good and all that, but...
Abdullah ibn Umar used to say, I want to, the son of Umar radiallahu anh, I prepare myself for my wife the same way she prepares herself for me.
Right. But back to the question for Habeeb is like what kind of thought are you doing as far as like, let's get some of what you're educating people on, into the like our premarital counseling and whatnot. You know what I mean?
Sir. Bring it.
That's a very good question. I don't actually work with children, because that's a very complicated affair, and I don't really provide like workshops directly to like for premarital counseling. The people generally I prefer to work with are sex educators, sex therapists, religious leaders, both Muslim and non-Muslim. And for them to provide that information in the way that best suits their culture. The reason being is because in some cultures, and again, I'm talking about subcultures, even for example, like within the US, people might be very comfortable to have that question, to have that kind of conversation. So when I've spoken to some people from West Africa or maybe parts of from the African American community, some of the conversations are a bit more direct. In other cultures, it's a bit more conservative, and you don't want to cause offense. So that's why it's I don't think it's necessarily. I think in terms of understanding like what's the range, I'll try and provide that information. But in terms of how would you ask that question, this, that, and the other, again, I think you have to gauge it on a case by case basis.
Yes, sir.
Because again, you have to take people's culture in there, and you don't ultimately want to offend someone. And again, the same way, because I always try and flip it back to the men, is in okay, you might be saying okay, you want to get some top and things like that, but then what if she were to say, how big are you? Are you the size of an iPhone or half of the size of an iPhone? You just consider that to be completely inappropriate. Or not only how big are you, how long can you last? Are you going to finish before like we get to the second chorus of a song?
He doesn't know. He's a virgin. He's a virgin. He doesn't know that.
Well, actually,
I'm joking, Habeeb.
You know, I'm just saying. I'm just saying because it's. I just say even the language we use have to be very careful because when we say that, it might be smelling a bit down there. It might be because it might be her diet. It might be because, there might be other reasons. But if she's healthy, she's clean, fresh, there shouldn't be no issue. And the vagina's got a natural, unique scent, and it smells sweet, or it should smell sweet. Not sweet as in like strawberries, but its own unique scent. But I just think that even the language we use, and women obviously naturally they're more, might be fragile than men, even like in terms of what so we have to be careful with how we speak about their anatomy, especially if we're speaking about it quite flippantly, because if it was the other way around, a lot of us men wouldn't be able to take it.
Sure. Well, actually,
and we could probably take more than them. So that's why it's just the language in terms of how you kind of convey that message. But again, judge it on a case by case basis and understand the culture and the people that you're dealing with.
I mean, maybe I'm a frank person, but like I think the first question is a legit question. If a sister has like an idea in her head that she wants her husband's penis to be a certain size, and
the funny thing, the story
he could measure it. Like you could literally measure it.
And scholars spoke about the story of and this was one of the inspiration behind naming the book A Taste of Honey. The story of Tamima bint Wahab. And this is a story. It's in Bukhari, it's in Muslim, it's in the Nasa'i. She's not mentioned by name. She's referred to as the wife of Rifa'a. And in the Muwatta, it names her Tamima bint Wahab. But she was a woman who was recently divorced from Rifa'a. Then she married Abdul Rahman bin Zubair. And then he was able to sexually satisfy her. And then she went to the Prophet ﷺ to kind of seek a divorce. And she referred to him saying, to the Prophet ﷺ, referred to him saying he has like the fringe of a garment. And scholars say it means either one of two things, either that he was impotent, i.e. not being able to sustain an erection to have intercourse, or he had a small member, i.e. small penis. And you have scholars that are talking about women like big penises and women have a right to that. But in terms of actually asking that forthrightly before you get married, again, it's a bit of a sticky one.
It is literally, yes. So I'll tell you why premarital counseling is very important to answer your question, is because the counselor, if you want to refer to him as that, or the therapist, he is giving both the male and the female advocacy, which is why it's best practice for him to speak with the man separately and the woman separately. Obviously not an intimate relation, but the best practice, because it's going to be intimate conversation over the phone, and he's doing it for the sake, and he has to have taqwa of Allah. But what are specific questions that you have that you're not able to ask right now? Because after marriage it's going to be super easy, right? But they're just not married yet. What questions are you able to ask on just basic issues? Okay, sexually, what question would you like to ask that you're not able to ask, right? That's why premarital counseling is very, very important, because you have advocacy now that they're breaking that barrier for you to ask that. But they're probably not going to use the word blowjob, right? They're going to say like oral sex or whatever. They're going to try to finesse it a little bit. You know what I'm saying? So it's really, really important to have that advocacy. So you could rest assured that the counselor is to take care of all of that for you. That's why that's that important.
That's what I'm saying too. I think a lot of it is verbiage. It's language, right? If you go like, "Hey, you giving blowjobs," right? I mean, it's kind of a direct thing. I mean, if you know what I mean? Like, if someone asked me, like, a woman asked me, "Hey, are you gonna suck my titties," right, or something like that, right? I'd be like, "What are you talking about?" You know what I mean? Like, whoa. I mean, yeah, but
can you emulate your tongue motion?
No, but I'm saying it's like, I'm saying like there's a degree. I think especially with two Muslim people looking to get married, there's a degree of understanding. I think most intelligent what women understand that men desire sex.
Yes.
Right? And I think there's ways to frame what you're looking for.
I actually don't believe that.
No.
Don't believe what?
That women think that women know that.
No,
That-
of course
I don't know.
they do.
Let's ask Habeeb. Do women realize that men want sex?
Sorry, say that again, bro.
Does the average woman, Muslim woman, getting married, is she under the understanding that men desire sex?
Yes and no. I don't think a lot of women understand the way. I don't think a lot of women appreciate how the way men desire sex.
Like a
They
degree of
understand
it that we
want
need it, yeah. But I'm saying,
but not like how we really want sex.
Yeah.
Like even like, and I listened to one of your episodes. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, where I think it was Maheen was talking about.
course.
And again, a lot of men will be shamed if a man were to say that he wants to get married to have lawful relationships. A lot of women will kind of shame him for that.
Yeah.
Say that you can't just get married for sex. When in the Sharia, and again, please correct me otherwise, Sheikh Ahmed, is that is I'm not saying that is a sole reason, but that is a legitimate reason.
Of course. Yeah.
Because a lot of women buy into like love, and I want him to marry me for me, not just about sex. And it's like that's one part of it, but a lot of men do, we sexualize women, and we do want to sleep with them. But I just think a lot of women just don't really see, even like the whole idea of men having multiple wives. A lot of women don't really see that, because it's like if he loves me, why would he want to sleep with someone else?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I mean, I don't think it's the fact that they don't realize that men want sex. I think they're viewing the way they desire sex is different than the way men desire sex.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I mean.
For them, it's
Sorry,
a
that's
build up, right? It's a consequence of X, Y, and Z, and that's sex happens, right? But for men, you don't need the X, Y, and Z. You just want sex, right? So it's very different than like I always say this before that for men, sex is like an itch. Right, like you like if you have an itch on your back, you're gonna scratch that, and then you can carry on your day. Right?
Nice
It
analogy.
is what it is. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it's more than that for men and too, but at the very basic level, right? The idea is that it's an urge that men have, and I don't think women understand that is the same level as men. I mean, the desire is different.
Right. So
I
in
agree.
that sense,
I'll just interject with that. So I agree, but interestingly enough, because a number of like psychologists have kind of spoken out against, as they call it, like the intimacy myth or the emotional intimacy myth, that there are some women who are just aroused the same way men are, even though they may be a minority. There are some women that are that way inclined. And even if we look at the Quran, the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam and the wife of Aziz Zuleika, she was turned on by the mere sight of him.
Yes.
Or sorry, the women of Medina.
Yeah.
So what we generally kind of think about how men have got spontaneous desire, that we see someone like a woman that we're attracted to, we're ready to sleep with the woman. Interesting enough, if you actually look at the response of the women of Medina when they saw Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, they were turned on by his sight, because he was an extremely beautiful person. And if you read a lot of the classical tafsirs about it, they kind of talk about it. Now the funny thing is that sometimes scholars will say, or some people say that's an exception to the rule, which that might be the case. But it's just interesting that you have examples in our tradition of women who were turned on by a really attractive man and are ready to sleep with him, to the point where Zuleika obviously tried to rip his shirt from behind, like aggressively wanted to sleep with him.
Yeah.
Where generally our understanding is, no, that's the way men are. But
Yeah.
we have an example, like I said in the Quran, where it's actually the opposite. So I'm just saying that to say that you have both cases.
I get you. Actually, I would argue that I believe that women probably are hornier than men are. I just think that we have much higher. There's much more that has to go into having sex for women than men,
Yeah.
right? It's not that they're less hornier than men. I think they're probably more hornier than men, but they need more. Like, for example, we're gonna speak frank, right? If a woman, if you come in from your wife, whatever, you just burp real loud, right? She's probably not gonna have sex with you, right? It's a turn off, right? There's a woman could potentially do it in front of Mahi and he'd still have sex with her, right? It's just
God.
no. I mean, it's just the reality, right? Like the conditions that up to leading to the sex is
not
very
wrong.
different for women, right? So I'm saying we just have lower standards as to who we're gonna have, as to what we're gonna have sex, right?
Exactly. One of my teachers told me one time that like men, we are very content with like below average sex, right? Women, like they can go like without it, but they will go. They like sex, but it has to be good sex. And I think we have a lower bar, so therefore we can just do a quick drive-by, 30-second bust a nut and keep it moving.
But
you know
you know what the exception to the rule, and you can talk
Go
about
ahead.
this, Habib. The exception is that, look, some of this, what I think what you guys are saying, there's a little bit of a fallacy in something in there. Why? Is because what it comes down to is women are only going to open up, and you said they're more horny than men, when they actually trust, for instance, their husband, right? When they trust and they're used to it now, then you see a different side of it. And that's why you'll have many guys complaining that, I can't keep up with her. And that's true, is because there's a trust issue and they need to have a certain... But yes, there are certain standards that are different in men and women as far as a sexual experience is concerned. And that's totally understandable.
Sheikh,
Right?
I came up with a new title for your book, for Habib's new book, The Phallic Fallacy.
Yeah, Habeeb, just one sec. I just want to say this to I don't disagree.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, I think when a woman opens up, it's that she feels safe, secure,
Yes.
all those things that are there. Then she feels like, and she's comfortable in her body.
Yeah.
Sure, right? But I'm saying, a man is very different in that sense,
Yes.
right? Like, I mean, I'm not, and that's why I argue that women are probably hornier than men are. It's just that what requires them to get to the level of having
That's what you mean.
sex,
Yes, sir.
meaning that safety, security, comfort, all that, right? Desiring, like there are little things that can put off a woman. It could be
Yeah.
a smell. It could be like just the fact that you didn't look at her the right way in the morning, or something. It could be, right? It's more picky. Is what my point is.
It's not you have no idea. It could be the way that the moon was lined up that day or something.
No, look, a lot of times, guys, especially now after the post-COVID era, many men are wearing PJs all day, working from home.
Yeah.
They're not, dressing
And
up.
women.
Yeah, both. I'm not saying, but you have to make yourself a bit presentable, at least.
At least a majority of the time.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Yeah.
Especially if you want it, you gotta
especially
look
if you want
at-
it,
yeah.
you have to. Women are biologically designed, at least I feel, that they have some protective barriers in sexual selection, so that they pick the right mate for the highest optimum genetic quality to enter their womb. Even though they have no intention to have a baby or anything, but they're biologically designed to select the best DNA. What do you think about that, Habeeb?
Yeah, I agree. I think you all hit on some really good points, but I also add that I think culture does. We spoke about culture before, but in terms of the way women view their sexuality, I think it can be shaped by their culture. If you're in a culture where women are encouraged, and I think we see this a lot in our respective cultures in both in the US and the UK, where women are encouraged to be like sexually promiscuous and outlandish and things like that, they are more likely to be that way inclined. And this is there was a theory that was by a psychologist, Roy, who's, I can't remember what he called it, but yeah, erotic plasticity, and he said that women's sexuality is more malleable depending on the culture that they're in. So, for example, what he hypothesizes is that, for example, if you get a woman, even if she's like a heterosexual woman, and you put her in an environment where bisexuality is encouraged, to sleep around is encouraged, she's more likely to indulge in that than a man. Whereas if you get like even sleep with other women or have relations, whereas if you get a man like a straight man and you put him amongst obviously all homosexuals or bisexuals, he's not going to change. He knows what he likes. Yeah. Whereas men, so his argument was that women's sexuality is more kind of fluid, and that's why women are more likely to partake in. And this is something that again, it's a theory. Some people don't necessarily agree with it, but it's something that a number of like I said, psychologists have kind of tried to understand that.
So does that mean women can grow to desire a man then? I mean, is that what you're saying?
It'll make sense why they decline. Or it's yeah.
You hear that a lot of women who say, I'm not that way inclined, but then in a certain environment after actually I don't mind being with a woman. So what he was arguing is women's sexuality, and again, this is not the model which was developed by Alfred Kinsey of that sexual orientation is kind of fixed, which I don't necessarily agree with, or people fit into one of the, I think the 7 or 9 categories, which that's a problem in of itself. He was just saying that women's sexuality is shaped based on the environment that they're in. And that can it does play into kind of what you said more about.
I can see that. I mean, I can see that.
And that's why, and the you could call it the threat or the worry about female sexuality is something that historically across cultures, people, particularly men, have been worried about. In some cultures where they believe women are hypersexual, some cultures, unfortunately, they go to ridiculous means to try and control that. Whether it's in the form of like female genital mutilation or female genital cutting, X, Y, and Z. And even within our tradition, and this is something that, especially when I'm working with non-Muslims, I'm trying to help them understand, even Muslims as well, understanding what some scholars have said, and I'm just by way of, I do not support female genital mutilation or anything like that, but there is conversation about female circumcision. But if you listen to what some of the scholars have said, and this is something that a number of non-Muslims are attacking Muslims and Islam about, where we know like there are certain hadiths, and it's mentioned in all of the four madhahib, that scholars do permit a form of female genital cutting. And generally what that refers to is the either a slight incision, like a slight nick, ritual nick, of the clitoral glands or the clitoral hood, or is some scholars they say is permitted to remove the clitoral hood, but not the gland. Like you don't touch the clitoris.
Yes. And
Unfortunately, you find some scholars who actually have said or misunderstood that and said that no, you can cut the clitoris because the reason why you cut the clitoris is to moderate female desire, because they had this belief that women have excessive lust. So in their eye, they were thinking that when the Prophet said "Ashimi wala tunhiki," like cut lightly but do not cut excessively, it was referring to like a light cut of the clitoris because that will moderate women's desire. So it's like a man.
yeah,
So
and
did-
the
did
reason
that-
for that,
Understanding the
Didn't that
context.
have to do with like the size of some women? Where the larger it was, it might have caused them to be aroused more often. Or I mean, I've been a
Yeah.
while since I read the
Yes.
discussion, but
Yeah,
it wasn't
exactly.
like the default that it should be like. I could be wrong here. I don't know.
yeah,
And that's something I've looked into quite heavily because female genital cutting and mutilation is widely practiced in parts of West Africa where I'm from and parts of East Africa. It's something that I'm actually quite passionate about and helping and trying to help people understand that Islamically we're not supposed to be mutilating young
Yeah.
girls and women and cutting off the clitoris and things like that. And where people are taking some hadith or some statement from some scholars and misapplying it and abusing it
yeah,
in the name of like purifying or saving the girl or making sure that she doesn't commit sin and stuff like that. So this is like an abuse of the religion kind of thing.
yes,
And on the other side, because I know, I mean, fortunately, correct me if I'm wrong, that female genital cutting is not widely practiced in the Indian subcontinent, apart from like a Shia sect called Adodi. A lot of South Asians that I speak to, they don't know that there's no such thing in
Right.
of female circumcision in Islamic
Yes.
tradition. It's like because it's not practiced.
It's the Dawoodi Boras. The
their
Boras, they
culture.
do that.
Yeah, because-
and oddly enough,
yeah, so it's
they
about-
came out of Yemen. So oddly enough, they came out
Yeah.
from that region.
Yeah. So where there's and there was even, I'm not going to name, there was there was a case of a famous, well, not famous, but a popular imam. He was talking about female circumcision in America, and he mentioned that the reason why non-Muslim women are hypersexual is because they haven't been circumcised. And this is and it went viral, and then and again because he was quoting what some scholars of the past had said, and there are some scholars who did say that, but again that's their opinion, but there's no hadith that supports that. And in actuality, when the Prophet ﷺ, the rationale for, I know there's some debate in terms of the authenticity of that particular hadith when he spoke to Atiyah, but the rationale for that was so that the woman has a brightened face, i.e. more satisfied, and the husband is more pleased with her. And what scholars of the past have said, the rationale behind that is because if you remove the clitoral hood, it exposes the clitoral gland, so during intercourse, it's easy to stimulate, so she's more likely to experience an orgasm.
yes,
And what's crazy about it is that, not the particular hadith I'm saying, is that in Western cultures now, they've got a practice known as clitoral hoodectomy.
Yeah.
And clitoral hoodectomy is the same as that what scholars spoke about, like the Islamic female circumcision. And they speak about the sexual benefits of this particular
Right.
cosmetic surgery. But when it's practiced in the West, whether it's in Europe, America, or Australia, it's cosmetic surgery, it's female genital cosmetic surgery. If it's practiced by Muslims or brown and black people, it's female genital mutilation.
Yeah.
That's
So it's also
great.
important that
That's
we
so
as
in-
Muslims understand the difference. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm saying that's so interesting because Islamically, I mean, I think even from a cultural perspective, we have to separate the difference between FGM and actual, circumcision,
Yeah.
right? Which and like even right now in America, they have rejuvenation surgeries, right? Where they, even if it's not badly looking or whatever used, like they will make it look more appealing, and they will take away certain areas to make it more accessible, right? Especially the clitoris, right? No, it's true.
Yeah, no,
They'll
no.
do that, and
Sorry.
so
What
the
do you
idea is that, but and what he's saying is a double standard is that they don't call that FGM. Right?
Yeah.
They just simply say that, oh, that's a health benefit, right? The same way that we would view the circumcision of males as a health benefit, right? There's numerous articles about, decline or avoiding penile cancer, avoiding, dirt and UTIs and so many things they go into. And there are medical benefits of doing this in certain cases.
Yeah.
if it's done properly.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, like he's mentioning, that there are certain people who have taken this to a degree where they've gone excessive in it, where to the point where they've taken off other parts of the vagina, not just the hood of the clitoris. They've even tried to begin to sew things up, and this is the FGM, and I don't think anyone here, any scholar, would advocate for that.
Yeah.
I have a question about. So
I think it's so
clitoris.
just to put a sorry, so important point. And I heard one of Mort, you said this in one podcast, and I loved it. When you're speaking about how, like, when we do da'wah and stuff like that, it's not about what the Bible says or what Christianity says and comparing from an Islamic perspective with what the Quran says. We should start from our own tradition. We should be defining like certain of these terms and things like that. And that's the case with like FGM and female circumcision. We as Muslims, I think far too much of us, we have somewhat of an inferiority complex, where we wait for the West to define and say, this is abuse, this is FGM, this is this is that. And then we try to understand within our tradition, what does it fit into?
Right.
Sure.
And I think that's something that's quite problematic, because like you mentioned, whether it's, labiaplasty and it's I don't know if, I'm not saying you've watched the Barbie film, but that's something that is, have you heard of like the designer vagina, the Barbie vagina?
Yes.
That's really popular as well.
Yes.
And again, this whole idea of having this, because of porn, because of this idea of having a total nipped in vulva where you can't see any lips and things like that, you're having a lot of women, even in the UK as young as 9, having this surgery called labiaplasty, where the inner lips, the vulva lips.
Wow, 9 years old?
Yeah, as young as 9 years
I mean,
old.
this was originally called rejuvenation, and it was done generally for older women that had children or had intercourse, and obviously things get they change, right? And so it was meant for them to feel more comfortable about their body and to look younger, right? And I'm surprised at 9 years old they're doing this stuff.
So we talked about the clitoris a lot, right? So I have a very technical question now, because I think we got to start talking about, like, people are tuning in because they basically want to know how to get their women off. All right, so. If I understand correctly, the clitoris, the tissue that's made up, is the similar kind of tissue that goes into the penis, right? As far as, like, that's what gets you going. Okay, am I right there? Is that, or am I kind of, is that accurate?
No, I think he's a bit off there.
A little off there?
I misunderstood.
It's not a
The
penis.
clitoris goes into the penis.
Sorry?
Sorry, did you say the clitoris goes into
No.
membrane, like a tissue.
I'm saying that the material that it's made out of is similar to the material that's
Skin?
It's like the cartilage that's
it's
inside the penis.
homogeneous to the penis, you mean?
Analogous, yeah. As far as, like,
analogous to the penis, sorry, yes.
in a sense that, like, it stimulates the same way, like
It's more concentrated. It's like a more concentrated version
More
of the penis.
vascular,
right,
more nerve
So with that
endings,
being
yeah.
said, so we talked about earlier that, Mort was mentioning that, like, a girl could, like, burp in front of me and still, like, it wouldn't really matter to me, right? So but the point with that was that, like, men are, like, you could have a fight with your wife and still, like, be down to, like, smash like 2 minutes later, right?
100%.
But women, it's, like, different because there's the emotional thing. So let me ask you, this is the question. If your woman or wife or whoever is completely, like, mentally checked out, but knowing that the clitoris is the same kind of stimulation, because for the dude, you could be, like, not in the mood, but if she starts rubbing you up in that area, you'll probably get erect, right? Does it, like, can that work the same way? If a woman is completely mentally checked out, are there physical things you can do that can override it?
It's a very good question. So yes and no. And the reason why I say yes and no is that, yes, the clitoris works similar to the penis, as in the clitoris does become erect and does harden like the male penis. But if a woman is mentally, I know everyone talks about the clitoris and there is this fascination with the clitoris, but the biggest and most important sexual organ of the woman is her brain. It's not the clitoris. It's not the vagina. So if a woman is mentally checked out, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what kunyaza you do. It doesn't matter how good you are with your tongue. It's going to be very difficult for it to get her off. So it's important that men understand that. And that's why a lot of the work that needs to be done is psychological, in terms of making sure women feel safe and secure and comfortable when you're going to engage in any form of intimate relations. And again, when you look at, drawing it back to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when he's talking about sending messengers, is because the psychological aspect. It's not just about the physical aspect. So women don't function the way men are. Now, women can, and the reason why I said yes and no in terms to your question, is because a woman's body can show signs of arousal, but she's not actually mentally turned on. And it's important that people understand this. And this is something called arousal non-concordance. And this is where your body can show signs that you're turned on, but mentally you're not turned on. So there's a disconnect. So a man can be thinking because she's erect or because she's self-lubricating, because she's getting wet, that she really wants it, when in reality she doesn't. And she might say, no, I don't want it. But you might be thinking, but you're dripping down there. Like, I'm sure you want it. And she's like, no, she doesn't want it. And that's, again, it's called arousal non-concordance. And it's something that women, it's a normal thing that women experience. And men, we also experience it. And I'll give you an example. It's like, you know, when you have morning wood.
Yeah.
And the morning wood is obviously when you wake up with an erection. Now, physically, you look like you want to have sex, but you don't want to have sex. It's just that's just like a natural bodily reaction.
Yeah.
And women have that as well. But again, unfortunately, because people not only do not understand the anatomy, but they don't understand the female sexual response cycle, they think because she's physically showing signs of arousal, again, either by the clitoris becoming erect or because she's the vulva, the lips is becoming engorged and it looks obviously and is palpitating, is getting quite reddish, or she's lubricating, you think that she's turned on. But ultimately, if you want to know if a woman's turned on, it has to obviously be from what she actually says, or she's kind of giving clues. But if she's clearly saying she's not interested in sex or she's not turned on, you can ignore what her body might be saying.
So I know that in some of your beautiful talks, you have a model, right? You carry a model. Maybe you can bring the model out for the next question that I have. A model meaning the model of the female anatomy, right? Since we're talking, we mentioned Kunyaza a few times. Can we just get into it? I've been waiting to hear this from him. If we can just, because since we're talking about pleasuring and all that kind of stuff, and why Kunyaza actually helps men last longer and develop sexual discipline. Are you guys cool with that if we just jump here?
They haven't defined it first. Like, where does it come from?
Yeah, exactly. Bismillah.
Yeah, so Kunyaza is an ancient tradition from Rwanda in East Central Africa, and it derives from the word kunyara, meaning to urinate or to water. And essentially, Kunyaza is, I'll talk a little bit actually about the legend of the story. So according to tradition, again, this is just a story that is told in Rwanda and parts of East and Central Africa. There was an ancient queen from Rwanda who her husband had went out to war on a military battle. So she called one of the guards to make love to her. Now the guard was petrified. He was, worried because if the king came back, he was going to be executed.
Sure.
But then the king said, I'm summoning you. You have to make love to me. I'm missing my husband. I need someone to make love to me. So God was walking towards her and he was holding his penis in his hand and he was shaking it a lot. He was trembling. And as he was trembling, he was hitting his penis against her clitoris. And it was from there, a large gush of fluid emanated from her loins, and Lake Kivu was formed, which is one of the largest lakes in Central Africa. And then when the husband came back, the wife told the husband, this is how I want you to stimulate me. It's not just about penetrative intercourse. I need you to perform this tapping technique, which is known as Kunyaza. That's the legend. Again, I'm not saying it's a truthful story, but that's just like how they educate like people in their community about this story. So essentially, Kunyaza refers to the technique, which is a man using his penis, preferably erect, to pay close attention to the clitoris and the labia minora, which is the inner lips. And he does like in the form of a tapping technique. Sorry, I don't have the vulva puppet with me, but he does in a tapping technique where he taps out the clitoris. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes, sir.
Like this.
Nice.
He can write his name. He can go up and down. He's ultimately teasing the clitoris. And I think one of the great things about the Kunyaza technique is teaching men sexual discipline, because you are doing what you can to ensure that she is sexually satisfied before yourself. There are two types of Kunyaza. There's simple Kunyaza and there's a complex Kunyaza. The complex is a combination of the tapping technique as well as slow thrusting, whereas simple Kunyaza is more just about non-penetrative stimulation of the clitoris. So it's a technique, like I said, which focuses on stimulating the clitoris, which again we know is the most essential erogenous zone to help perform the climax, and most women require clitoral stimulation in order to orgasm. And again, if a woman is in a good state of mind and she's relaxed and she pushes out with her pelvic floor muscles, she's more likely to ejaculate, also known as popularly squirting. That's essentially what Kunyaza is.
So do you have to do that with your penis, or can you do it like you slap that?
It's a very good question. I mean, technically,
because a slap every now and then is pretty good. You know what I mean? So
yes,
So that's why you're talking about the tapping.
no, I'm talking about tapping. I'm talking about like,
I'm trying to visualize the position how you would tap in that way, because it seems like you'd almost.
No, you just,
bro. Hey, Sim, do you have a illustrator that can draw some figures?
I think it's pretty obvious.
Here, bro. It's like this.
No, but like how the body is situated, right? Like you have to put a pillow underneath her butt or something, and then like you know.
Yeah,
what I
that's
mean?
one of the that's one of one of the positions. There's traditional positions, but one of the positions is where a woman is sitting down with her legs spread out,
Yep.
or like on the side of the bed, and a man is kneeling on his knees, so he's able to fully obviously concentrate on the wife's anatomy to perform kunyaza, or she can be lying down. And then obviously he's on top of her, but again kneeling, and then he can perform the kunyaza.
So does that mean that he wait? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
No, go.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so I was saying that. So is it just he waits for the orgasm to happen when he's performing kunyata, or it's like, and then sexual intercourse begins, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's either or. So again, if you're doing a complex kunyaza, which is a combination of
Got it.
non-penetrative stimulation and then penetrative stimulation, then obviously you can obviously mix and match. Whereas if you're doing simple kunyaza, it's just about stimulating the clitoris without penetrating. And it's something that again, one of the benefits of it, especially for men, is that it's teaching you ejaculatory control. Because for a lot of us as men, especially the way a lot of men have sex, it's just about the harder, the faster, the better, because that's what kind of gets us off. When in reality, like the average man, he can only on average, sex only lasts 5.4 minutes. Whereas in terms of for women who can orgasm via vaginal intercourse, on average, they need like 14 minutes. So you've got a big discrepancy anyway. And then on top of that, you've got some men, although the average man can have sex for 5.4 minutes, if he's just pounding away as fast as he can, he's only going to last, if he's lucky, a minute or half a minute. And I just ask men, even just try to understand, if someone were to say to you, I'm going to sprint flat out, right? That's where they have sex. How long do you think they can sprint for?
5 seconds max, like max speed. But yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm
Maximum
doing
is like
yeah, maybe 30,
maximum
40
like
seconds at
30.
full speed.
Yeah. Absolute maximum is like 35 seconds. It's not humanly possible for someone to sprint. I'm not about just run and like sprint, like in terms of like 100 meters, like more than 35 seconds.
Look, you have to pace yourself.
The way a lot of men have been, I was going to say educated, miseducated about sex because of watching porn, that's the type of sex that they see. So when a lot of men are having sex, they're performing. So sex for them, in terms of what is good sex, is just hammering away, jackhammer approach. And for them, that is what good sex is. And then again, especially if you've been watching that, and again, let's be honest, a number of Muslims have been conditioned to watch sex, have been miseducated that way. And when they go into the bedroom, even some women have been miseducated. They think that is what good sex is. So they're just all about performance and how long they can last with this like jackhammer approach. Whereas if the focus is about pleasure, and that's what one of the beautiful things about the kunyaza practice, it's not necessarily how long you perform kunyaza, or how quick it takes for her to get off into climax, or how much she can gush, and whether she can squirt the size of a cup of this and the other. That's besides the point. The goal of kunyaza is female pleasure. It's sexual satisfaction of the woman.
So
and if that's a priority again,
it's actually normal then. It's normal then that with a jackhammer approach, the average dude is only lasts like 30 seconds. So that's like, but that's the problem. That's the issue. Like people aren't educated. Because I think there's a perception out there that if you're going jackhammer approach, you're supposed to go 10, 15 minutes. But you're saying that's just impossible.
That's impossible. And a lot of women have been miseducated because a lot of women will even shame men because he can't last that long. And again, like I'll put up some like polls or like memes on like IG and things.
Your
and
memes are the best, by the way.
A lot of women, and I do that because again, because I try and do like more of an informal approach rather than like a clinical statistics and stuff like that. But a lot of women, they are miseducated about male sexuality. So if a man lasts like a minute, but he's been hammering him away, she thinks that like something's wrong with him, or he's got suffering from premature ejaculation. But then that same woman, if you were to ask her to ride for 20 seconds, she's panting after she can't even last more than like 10 seconds.
My legs hurt and thighs hurt. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Excuses will come out. I
had a long day.
You had a long day. I can't do it. Your turn. So it's just for people to understand. Like women, they think it's easy for us as men. It's like if and they think I think most men are not selfish. I just maybe men we don't understand either because the woman hasn't been very good at communicating what she wants and not vocal in the bedroom. But they think that we're just selfish in the bedroom when in reality, if on average you can climax within 30 seconds, but you're going for 10 minutes, even 15 minutes, I'm giving you a good time. If you actually think about it, I'm actually delaying myself for you. But their expectations, they think that if a man's climaxing within a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, he's really selfish in the bedroom. So again, it's about trying to educate both men about female sexuality and women about male sexuality.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you usually, I mean, in some of your talks, even your writing, you talk about withholding intimacy and sexless marriage epidemic. Is Kunyaza related to this, or is this a different thing on its own and like how to deal with it?
But that's actually different. That's
Okay.
more from Islamic perspective,
Got
and
it.
it's something that I know in this climate it's quite difficult to kind of mention these hadith because people be triggered and things like that. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said it for a reason a number of times, and scholars they spoke about it in terms of, again, I'm not going to get into the whole like angels cursing women and things like that, but in terms of informing women, and even one particular hadith that when a woman asked before she got married, she said, what is the right of the husband over the wife? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam informed her that if he calls you to the bedroom, you shouldn't withhold, meaning you shouldn't weaponize sex. You shouldn't use sex as a tool to kind of abuse your husband. And this does happen a lot. And one of the things that's quite difficult to kind of even have this conversation in public is because you wouldn't know if a woman is doing that. And we talk about women. I mean, there are some women, and this again might be controversial to say, there are some women who are good mothers but terrible wives. There are some men who are good fathers and terrible husbands. But if we're talking about in terms of intimate relations, men have a right over women and women have a right over men. And I'm not talking about marital rape. That's completely haram. I'm not saying that a man has the right to enforce himself on his wife, and that's not what the Prophet ﷺ was speaking about. He's just referring to your husband has a right over you the same way you have a right over him. And I think a lot of women do not realize and they don't really appreciate that. And it's interesting because now you have some American, I've got the lady's name, Michelle Weiner Davis, I think her name is. She spoke about the importance of, like, when she's speaking to married couples, that women have this thing where sometimes they're not necessarily in the mood for sex, but once they start engaging intimacy, now they're in the mood, and it's called responsive desire. So a woman, whereas men were generally spontaneous, if we see a woman we're attracted to, we're ready to get off. Whereas a woman, she might not necessarily be interested, and then when you start kissing her and start fondling breasts and start tickling down below, then she's interested. So she was even advising women that and she used the expression from like just do it. Now again, those type of conversations in this, especially in the climate in the West, is probably easier for a woman to say than a man, because a lot of our sisters unfortunately probably will be triggered by it. But the issue of withholding sex and sexless marriages, or one scholar in Nigeria called it sexual starvation, it's actually quite prevalent amongst religious Muslim, hijab wearing, niqab wearing, studying in different institutes. Do it. So, but it's just because men generally, we're not going to vocalize those concerns in public, naturally, because again, we don't want to. But women and women amongst themselves, they wouldn't know if their friend is doing it, if you understand my point. Sure. So it's something that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about it for a reason. The scholars, they spoke about it for a reason. And I just think that we shouldn't be shy to talk about it, but obviously speak about it in a way that women understand the importance of men have needs, and they should try. Again, I'm not talking about, again, because someone will say, what if she's not feeling what? It's not talking about that. If she's got a legitimate excuse, it's perfectly fine. She doesn't have to have intercourse with him, as what scholars have said. But it's speaking about where women who weaponize sex, and some women will think, like, every time when I mention this, the women will say, oh, but what did the man do? And it's like, no, there's some women who are just vindictive like that. The same way there are some men who are very selfish and vindictive. So we just need to have a really mature and open conversation. And this really needs to be had amongst adults, because you can have this with children or young people or prior to marriage, and everyone will say, no, I would never do that. But the reality is there are a number of, and I do receive a number of messages from men who've been married for like 5 years, 10 years, and they've not been allowed to touch any breasts. That's what they've kind of said. And one guy said, it's difficult because I don't argue. What did he say? I don't negotiate with terrorists. Like, she's just putting herself ransom. Like, it's closed shop. But on the face of it, everything is, and they've got, beautiful children and this and the other. So how do you even broach that conversation? Because naturally, men were protective. We don't want to talk about our private lives, with others. So it's like, how do you kind of, and especially if a woman doesn't think she's doing anything that's wrong.
Sure. So you talk about marital rape. Marital rape. So that's an interesting dichotomy, because, okay, it makes sense. Like, okay, if she's sick or whatnot, there are clauses. Most dudes aren't going to be like complete jerks. But if you have people who are weaponizing it, and Sheikh Amr and I, we talk, in your line of work, you tell me about the situation you come across where some like women are just going like I like for example, I had a friend. I remember like he's a physician. Okay, when he was doing his like residency, his wife was like giving him like blocking him off for like 2-3 months at a time. You know what I mean? And at work, he was like dealing with these nurses who were like freaks. You know, they were inviting him. They were telling him he'd go to work on Monday and be like, yeah, we had an orgy. This is Jackson Park. You know?
By the way, they say a study came out. Nurses are the most promiscuous professions.
Okay. Yeah. So
they're dangerous.
Horses are trained.
You're basically a resident, you know, in this hospital, all these freaks, and your wife is like holding out in the bed for 3 months, right? So like now, if he forced himself upon his wife, he's like he's at, you know, you hear Mashaykh say this, right? Brothers, when you see a woman like out in the lower your gaze and just know your wife has that. So you worked a long day and you finna go home and you like you're trying to get some and she closes off, and let's say you forced yourself upon her. Now, because in the way our legal system would define it, that would be like rape, marital rape. But like I'm uncomfortable.
Sharia as well, we don't do that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sheikh Ahmed, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "La darar wa la dirar," that do not harm or don't return harm. So, if we're not allowed to harm non-combatant, you can't harm your wife. Rape is a form of sexual violence. I know people have issues with the term like marital rape. That how can you rape your wife? But yes, you can rape your wife. And I think we need to be very clear with this. And this is even when Sheikh Ahmed in the beginning was speaking about understanding fiqh and ahkam and rulings. Another thing which is important to understand adab as well, like etiquette. And I think that as a man in your right frame, if your wife doesn't want to have sex with you, okay, you need to sort that out. But to force yourself on her, that is something that I don't think, like, you should never do that. So I'm not going to try and, I know there's some people that said, oh, it doesn't, in our legal text, it doesn't mention like consent and things like that. But if you are a self-respecting man, a Muslim, you shouldn't do that. It's a sin as far as I'm concerned from the scholars that I've heard of. And I'm not going to try and like, you know, I just think that we need to kind of be quite clear with that. You need to sort out with your wife. Yeah. But in terms of forcing someone on no circumstances, should you ever do that?
I'm going to be honest too. I think at a human level too, right? I don't know. I mean, this could just be me, but I don't want to have sex with somebody who doesn't want to have sex with me. Yeah. Like at that moment, right? It's just very weird, right? Like, you know, I don't know. For me, it's just not.
But we're talking about a situation where, like, systemically over time, like they're like talking like 3-4 months.
Yeah, but then I would be thinking about a divorce. I mean, if you try, I have a conversation and be like, hey, either you got to fix it or you know something's not right here because. You know what I mean? Like you have to talk about it, but I mean, I still couldn't fathom the idea of forcing myself onto somebody and saying you're gonna take it. Like it just, it's like forcing someone to hang out with you. Like if you don't want to be here, don't be here. You know what I mean?
You know, I'm glad you said that. Sorry to butt in, but I'm glad you said that. I mean, I think that plays into because that's your character. Mm-hmm. Like someone can tell you, like you don't need to study fiqh for that. That's your character. Like you said, if a woman doesn't want to have sex with you, you're not gonna have sex with her.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, some men, the way they read these historic books of fiqh and things like that, will have a like. Even if someone's asking that question, I'm wondering what's your personality like.
Yeah.
How would you want to have sex with a woman who just clearly petrified, clearly doesn't want it, but
true.
You know, it's my right. If anything, jack off, go to the bathroom, and honestly, it's just something that is for me. I just don't understand it because, and if you think you're going to force yourself on your wife, if you do that. What do you think that's going to happen to the relationship after?
That's my point too. Like in the long run, she's going to be terrified.
Long run, it's like,
right? It's going to be like, yo, you're going to break down this marriage, right? I mean, because now she looks at someone who violated her.
Yeah.
Not someone.
I think what Maheen is saying though is that she's capable of, but she's purposely, like, let's call it weaponizing, right?
Weaponizing,
and he happens to not be able to control himself, and he just jumps on her, and that's considered rape, right? Well, I'm not saying he should do that.
Right,
I'm saying that's something that Allah's. Look,
from a technical point of view, I was trying to get because my understanding was that the nikah is the consent.
Yes, of course it is, but but to move past that, I think that's a common understanding, is that look, we have to understand that Allah tests us in many, many different ways. And some of those tests are by people oppressing us. In this situation, it would be oppressive for a wife to do that to her husband. Uh-huh. But nonetheless, people believe that just because I'm getting married and we did our marriage contract and I did istikhara before I got married, my marriage is going to be perfect. No, there's going to be tests along the way too. It doesn't mean it's okay what she's doing, but that's something that you have to obviously get some type of counseling. You got to get some professionals involved, and if all else fails and she's going to continue that way, that's where Mort is saying that's grounds for divorce, even for a wife. Like if and this is full Islamic texts are full of this. I'm not saying this to be wishy-washy. One of the conditions for divorce is, for a woman, like asking for a divorce or a khul'a, is if the husband is not having sex with her and she wants to have sex. That's one of the, she can ask for a khul'a, definitely, in that situation, and ask the judge, hey, divorce me of this man because he just doesn't want to have sex with me, right? So it works both ways. So that's obviously the later approach, right?
Right.
But you have to, if you really love this woman and this is just a phase or whatever, you have to understand, hey man, you're gonna have to be patient here because this is just a part of it, you know?
So I'm thinking like long term too. I'm like, look, we know there is like certain principles in the Sharia, right? For example, the nikah is consent, right? But you don't ever want to come to reduce the marriage to just do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
Right? Marriage is more than that,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Like it's about the longevity of the marriage, right?
Yes, sir.
If you simply reduce it to saying, hey, you know what, you owe me that and I owe you this, right? And you're just keeping it that line.
Yep.
If you don't do that,
Transactional,
then
yeah.
if it's purely transactional, it's
You're already
almost
screwed.
mechanical.
You're already lost. Right?
Yeah, you're lost. I mean, you're
lost.
not gonna. I mean, the minute someone doesn't do something for you, like it's just okay. Now we got to go our own way, right? It's just that there's really nothing to work on, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is, I'm not saying it's not an issue. I'm saying I agree it's an issue that a woman's withholding sex and weaponizing it. I totally agree with it. But I would view this as the same way that, let's say she's on her period, even no matter how horny you are, you can't have sex with her,
Yeah.
right? It's something you can't do,
Yeah.
right? Same way, likewise. Hey, if she's not putting out, then she's not putting out. You have to find either therapy or you need to just threaten her with a divorce or go through the divorce, right?
Right.
But you have other avenues to rectify the situation besides jumping on her.
Sure, Habib. So back to like the woman's ultimate organ being the brain, right? We talked about that like maybe half an hour ago. So you're talking about these cases where you're talking about it seems like people reach DM because you post your DM sometimes you block their names out, but 10, 15 years during the game, wife's faking orgasm, whatever kind of issue, right? Sometimes there's like resentment built up, right? So it's going to take a lot of work for that woman to get dialed back in mentally for even kunyaza or anything like that you're teaching like to actually work, right? So what advice do you give to people who are experienced couples, or even like the wife is checked out, but the husband is like, hey, I've got kids in this. I'm not going to leave my kids hanging. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to divorce my wife because of the impact for the kids. You know what I'm saying? So like, how do you advise the brothers there who are like, women are checked out, they got to get them mentally dialed in first, and then the stuff will work. So just I know I gave you a lot there, but I hope I made sense.
Yeah, that's a very difficult one. So the woman is checked out after like 10, 15 years. Does the man still want to be intimate with her? And does she also want to be intimate with him, but she's just not there mentally?
Right.
That's I just would want to. I'm asking.
Yeah.
For clarification.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the woman is like open to having sex, but but she can't really. She doesn't enjoy it. She just does it as for her duty. Because a lot of God-fearing sisters will say, they will just go with emotion just because, that is what, they feel like, just to give the husband the rights, right? But they have it's pretty much like the worst thing. They don't like it, but they just, put up with it, right? So the husband obviously loves his wife, wants to, help, satisfy her, but he's realized that she's mentally checked out, right? And when they have a communication about it, it might be like, oh, she's like, well, you did this in the past, like 8 years ago, that one time you said something or whatever, stuff piles up. There's always resentment built up, right? So how do you undo that? How do you get them mentally dialed back in? Because there seems to be, if you were to like put a graph together, there's like year zero of marriage, like high frequency of sex, and it starts like it's like a inverse chart. If you ever look at like a graph. You know what I'm saying? It's like the longer you're married, the less frequently you're having sex. I think that's pretty normal. I think there should be some control there, like sort of like you're better having a curve. Someone's natural, but it's a curve. But like you get what I'm saying? Like how do you get her dialed back in mentally first, and how much work does that take? You know what I mean? Once you're like the brother's getting the message, because sometimes I think the first obstacle is the dude has to be willing to take the feedback or the criticism of his wife. Like let her like kind of go in. You get what I'm saying? And have a thick skin and like take it, and then start addressing those issues.
Yeah, sorry, I understood now what you're saying. There's no easy answer, but also at the same time, it's relatively straightforward in the sense that it sounds like it boils down to communication. Now, however you have that communication, whether it's one-on-one or whether you bring in like a counselor or like a someone that's respected that you can both kind of listen to and hear both sides of the story. Ultimately, it sounds like there's a communication issue, and again, it might be. And one thing as well that you often hear is that men will maybe be comparing their wife to how she was or what their sex life was 5 years, 10 years ago, or before the children. It's changed now, and you have people like Esther Perel. She mentions that sometimes the average marriage there might be like 3 cycles or 3 types of marriages. So, and in within one marriage, what she meant by that is that, for example, if there's maybe like a case of like infidelity or after having a child, you're now like in a different type of relationship. You're still married, but maybe the trust may be broken, or for example, the man has got like a porn addiction. So it might be you have to do something else in order to garner her trust. Likewise, you mentioned if the woman is checked out. So it's you mentioned she's checked out, but she still wants to engage in intimacy. So again, what may be how he romancing in like when they first got together is going to be totally different now. But ultimately, she's only the one that can really answer that. And obviously, when they can work together again, whether it's in the form of using an arbitrator, a counselor, or what have you, but where there's a willingness, like you mentioned, like from the woman, then inshallah they can work it out. And I just think that people just need to understand and explore what works for them. And I think oftentimes, and you often see this, especially I'm sure you see it on my page when I post some of these DMs anonymously. When there is an issue, the first reaction from a number of people is just leave him, divorce him. And that's a problem, and that's I think from Shaitan. But in terms of how you resolve your issues, again, it's on a case by case basis. But if there's a willingness, even from the man or from the woman, and understanding that, I think as one of the things that some of brothers do as well is that they just think about their wife as being the mother of their child, not as being an erotic sexual being or sensual being. And I think that's quite problematic as well, because when you just, and this might play into what Sigmund Freud mentioned about the Madonna whore complex, is that when you see a woman as just being like a loving woman, the mother of your child, you can lose the sexuality of her, and you don't see her as the same, that loving partner that you had previously, kind of thing. So I think it might be a case of how you view her, and again with herself, in terms of understanding that, okay, I'm at a different stage of my life in terms of what turns me on. It might not necessarily be going to certain restaurants or whatever. It might be doing some housework, and just understanding what she wants, because for men, we're relatively straightforward, whether you're 14, 24, 64 or 74. What turns us on is normally relatively, it's quite linear, whereas a woman, it changes even over time. So it's about, again, understanding what works for her, or what, and I think Morty mentioned this previously, about there might be a certain thing or like an ick that turns her off that you might not be aware of. Like 5 years ago it could be fine, but now it's an issue. So it's just about, again, having that honest and open communication, whether it's directly or indirectly with a counselor, and don't have that conversation when you're angry, and probably it's better not to have that conversation in the bedroom.
Yeah, I just think that that also, I mean, for the man, it's probably about sex, but there's a problem that you have to address, because that's just a symptom of what she doesn't want to have sex because there's a problem that's not addressed. Like, she's uncomfortable about something else. So I just look at it like that. Like, if you want to solve this, if you want to get to the point of sex, and I think that's why I mentioned earlier that women have more conditions than men do when it comes to sex, because if you want to get to that result, you've got to satisfy the beginning part of it first. If that's not there, their mind's not going to go to sex, right? Like he said, they could be physically ready for it, but they're just mentally not. They don't want it, right? And it's because something else is not satisfied there. But I just want to ask you, before you kind of move on to a segue to a different subject, but how likely is it for a woman that's checked out to like actually bring her back in? Because some people will tell you know what, once she's checked out mentally and emotionally, it's done. Like, I mean, it's almost no coming back from that. So in your experience, like, do you, or maybe stuff that you've read, is it likely for a woman that's like totally and mentally and emotionally checked out to kind of come back to the way things were before?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. I know that for a fact. It's definitely possible. Not only can she come back to the way she was before, but even better. And I think it's important that people understand that, and not to necessarily, again, when I mean it could be better, you not necessarily have the same relationship you had prior to when she was checked out, but it might be a different type of relationship. If you're just measuring it based on sexual frequency, that's something totally different. You might not be having as much sex as you was having when you was in your 20s, but you might be having more connection, more of an intimate relationship that's both enjoyable for both you and your partner alike. So I definitely think, well, I try to be quite optimistic in that respect, even from what I've seen and what I've actually personally experienced. That, and people have issues. It's perfectly normal. And I think that's, again, without diving into people's personal lives, we all have issues in our relationships. And this idea that it's just going to be great for the first 5, 10 years, and after it's just terrible, and then you're just going to have to just wait until you die together, and then reborn and go to Jannah. No, it could be you can revive the spark in your relationship, even if she's kind of checked out, or he might have checked out.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what happens, especially amongst a number of Muslims, is that when a woman is divorced, when she gets divorced and then she remarries, or maybe she doesn't remarry, that's when she wants to kind of understand her sexuality. And I'm saying that's kind of problematic. We don't need to wait for our sisters to kind of like be divorced and then realize, actually, and this is something that's, again, really troubles me, is that I often hear this story from women after they've been divorced and they kind of complain about the husband never satisfied them, X, Y, and Z. And I ask the question, did you speak to him? And it's like, no, I couldn't, because he would. And it's just like, you could have potentially resolved that situation if you had that open and honest conversation with him, regardless if it was 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line. But I definitely think it's possible to kind of, if a woman's checked out, to kind of revive the spark in the relationship.
Yeah, awesome. So I think we kind of, we talked about a few areas that we wanted to. So we wanted
there's a lot more things I have questions for. Inshallah, I want to be able to talk about some of his research in Brazil.
Yeah.
But inshallah, we can have him on again and explore other topics. And you, the listener, throw your comments in the comment section below with your questions related to what we should ask him regarding some of these topics. And let's explore a little bit about his research in Brazil.
Yeah. So maybe talk about that. I know you've talk about Brazil. People are very curious about it. I know, at least in America, Brazil is kind of like this land far off that many people dream to visit and possibly even marry from.
Well, I actually like to learn about the early Muslims in Brazil, and I remember reading about the Brazilian revolts that Muslims had started and eventually led to freedom for for slavery to go away in Brazil. So maybe you could talk about that.
Before you get started there, were the Maroons also in Brazil, or they're only in Jamaica? The people that call the Maroons, were they also in Brazil?
In Brazil, they were called the Malay.
Okay, go ahead. Yep, so go ahead. Fill us in, man. Let us know what the history is over there.
Yeah, so this is a topic that I'm quite passionate about, because obviously being Nigerian, and especially of Yoruba.
Wait, before you get there, are you Fulani or are you Hausa?
I'm Yoruba.
Oh, Yoruba. Oh, okay. So I've been to Lagos. I've been to Nigeria before. I had some business there a long time ago. But I met a bunch of Fulani brothers, and they were awesome. I call them my pastoral nomadic brothers, man. They're amazing, man. Mashallah.
Mashallah.
Yeah.
So I'm Yoruba, and sorry. Yeah. So I'm Yoruba, and I went to a Pan-Africanist Saturday school, not a non-Muslim Pan-Africanist Saturday school, when I was between the ages of, I think, 8 and 11 and 12. And I remember hearing about like the Nigerians and Nigerian Muslims in Brazil as from a relatively young age. So I was kind of aware of the Muslim presence in Brazil. And there's even some reports of Muslims traveling to Brazil even before the Portuguese. So like the predecessor of Mansa Musa, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Mansa Musa, the Mali emperor. His predecessor, Abu Bakr II, actually traveled to the Americas and landed in northeastern Brazil before even the Portuguese. But in relation to the Nigerians in Brazil, so in the 19th century, a number of West Africans from Nigeria were enslaved and transported to Brazil to work as slaves. They consist of Muslims and Christians. Now, the Muslims, they were known to be very intellectual, very religious. They used to preserve their religion, and this is something that is documented by the Portuguese colonizers at the time. And they also had like small prayer mats and small areas where you used to read the Quran and teach people about the religion. And they led a number of revolts in the 19th century in the northeastern Brazil, in the city called Salvador, which was the former capital of Brazil.
So around what year were they taken over there as slaves?
In the 19th century, it was over a number of years.
Okay,
so it was in the 19th century, so 18. Starts, I think, early 19th century, but it was like 18 something.
So as the transatlantic slave trade was winding down, they were sending them off to Brazil. Is that kind of?
No, well, in reality, Brazil received more slaves from Africa than America. Some historians say like 10 times more. So whilst we know much, and this might be because of the language, obviously we speak English and they speak Portuguese, more slaves, more black people landed in South America, particularly in Brazil, than did in the United States. But we just know more about the stories of African Americans,
Wow.
because obviously the English language, and we know about the influence of the, and even Malcolm X in his autobiography, he will also mention about the Muslims and the Brazilian, the black Muslims in Brazil as well, because he was well aware of it. So this is something that is known. There was a really great book that I read by Joe Jose Hayes. It was called Slave Rebellion in Brazil, and he was speaking especially about the African Muslims, and he specifically was speaking about African Muslims because they were the ones who led the slave revolt, mainly Hausa Muslims and Yoruba Muslims, who led the slave revolt, and they would have succeeded. Unfortunately, there was a couple of like infiltrators, informants amongst them who kind of told the Portuguese. A number of those Muslims were either sent to prison. Some of them were deported back to West Africa, and then some of them were killed. But there is a really good story that I wanted to kind of quickly highlight, and it's a story which for me is quite inspiring. It's a story of a man who was enslaved called Alufa, and sorry, the son of Alufa, Jose Maria, and he was enslaved in the 19th century, transported to Brazil. But whilst he was also enslaved, he was also able to work. So he worked as a cook in a number of slave trips, and he saved some money, where he saved enough money to buy his freedom, and then he traveled back to West Africa in like Sierra Leone, learned the Quran, learned about, because he was a Muslim, learned the Quran, learned about Islam, and then went back to Brazil and was teaching people about Islam. And he did about 2 or 3 trips, and this is in the 19th century.
Is this
before,
about Rufino?
you know, um,
Is
Rufino,
it
yes,
Rufino? Okay.
Rufino.
Okay.
Wow, amazing.
Rufino. That was the slave name he was given, and the slave name was given Rufino, but it's Jose Hayes, no, Jose Maria, sorry. So that was like it's hearing about these type of stories for me was, I don't know how to explain it, because it's like inspiring. Like,
Yeah.
this is a man that, again, before technology, I mean, we complain about how difficult it was, but this was someone that was actually doing da'wah. And when the Brazilian Portuguese police was interrogating him, because there was a number of slave revolts around the period when he was arrested, they were saying, like, convert to Christianity. And he said, even if you gave me all of the wealth in this world, I would not abandon my religion. And that was just something for me. It's like, subhanAllah, it's just something that, so that's part of his legacy. And interestingly enough, there are a number of Brazilians, Afro-Brazilians, as well as Brazilians who are not Afro-Brazilians, who are embracing Islam, and there's like a revival of Islam in northeastern Brazil because of like the efforts of the African Muslims. And I'm actually kind of in the process of filming a documentary about that, but I don't know when that's going to come out, because I've been filming that for the last 6-7 years. So, but, yeah.
So how
Inshallah.
how preserved is that African Muslim culture now in Brazil? I mean, I'm sure that was a century ago where they were eventually. I mean, where they probably came over there. So what about their ancestors and the preservation of their religion and their identity?
Great question. So, and that was something that struck me about Brazil. So, especially in like Brazil, obviously depends where you go. So it's a huge country, and the different parts of the Brazil, the culture is very different. But in northeastern Brazil, that's where it's like where the majority of the Brazilians of African descent, the culture is very similar to West African culture. So much so that the food is very similar to the food that's in present day Nigeria, the food that they eat. Some of the mannerisms, even when I went to Brazil, when I first went to Rio, people asked me if I was from Bahia because of my facial features, because a number of the Yoruba are in Bahia. And if you see it, so you can see it in the features, you can see it in the food, you can see it in the music, you can see it even in the dress. And even there's still a number of Brazilians who speak like the Yoruba language, the Nigerian language in Brazil today. So like, it's just really, for me, it was like, I felt like I was in Lagos. And I'm sure if you were to visit Malta as well, you kind of see like a strong African presence.
Wow.
In addition, so it's an amazing, it's just mind blowing, because you feel like you're in, like I said, you're in West Africa, and it's just like a really hybrid country,
amazing.
because you see so many different cultures, especially.
Yeah, because when I went down to Mexico, I met some of the Afro-Mexicans, and they came there centuries ago, but they are very much Mexican, but they're very much still African. Like it's a weird thing. I mean, they're not Muslims, but they preserve their African culture, and they're primarily fishermen, and they live out away from the major areas, but they preserve their culture. It's pretty amazing. I mean, I've been planning to go to Brazil, not just I mean, obviously this is another reason, but I've heard like I'm in touch with a lot of Muslim dawah groups that make dawah in Latin America specifically, and just the thirstiness of the people there for Islam, like it's just at a phenomenal rate. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, and that's why I wanted to commend you obviously for the podcast. And I was, even when I said to Sheikh Ahmed to keep doing what you're doing, one of the things which, and the reason why I say this is one of the when I was interviewing a couple of people in Brazil, and I did put this on my YouTube page, there was a brother who mentioned that he found out about Islam from YouTube by watching people like in London, I think even like in America, speak about Islam. So the work that we're doing, you might be thinking, okay, this is mainly for English-speaking Muslims in America, UK, and maybe Australia. And there's people even outside of those parts of the world who are engaged and even know about Islam. So just even hearing that story, and again, there's a couple of other brothers who kind of said the same thing, and there is a real thirst. It put me to shame because I'm hearing, like when I used to go there, especially for Jumu'ah, people traveling from all sorts of, because it's a very small masjid, but it's very close knit, and people come from all parts of the city, coming to the masjid. And sorry, I know I'm conscious of time, so I just want to add, one of the imam of the mosque, and this is why it's important that we as Muslims kind of even support other Muslim communities in different parts of the world. He said that there was I don't know if he was a Pan-Africanist, but it was someone from America, Black American. When he found out about the history of like the African Muslims in Brazil, he wanted to make the mosque just for Black people. Now the Imam, he's Nigerian, and he said, no, this Islam is a religion for everyone. Just because, yes, we've got the history of the Nigerian Muslims, this isn't like Nation of Islam or anything like that, where you can say that this is just for Black people. So that's something that, even as a Black person, I'm kind of conscious of, because obviously I do work and speak to people who are not Muslim but Black, and sometimes they learn about the religion because of the contribution of Black people, but then sometimes it becomes like a form of like, let's make it just about Black people, and that's something that is very problematic. So just kind of wanted to add that.
Mashallah. I mean, I'm sure you had the same experience as I did, because when I went to Mexico, I went to one of the first masjid in Cancun, and man, to see and the brother that came to Islam same way, he heard about Allah in passing, went to YouTube, watched videos, found out exactly how to be a Muslim from YouTube videos, found a way to travel to Pakistan. Now they became Muslim. I don't know how he did it, but got in contact with some brothers, traveled there for 4 or 5 months so he could learn the basics of his deen, how to pray, make wudu, ghusl, all these things. And he comes back and he's making da'wah to the indigenous peoples, the Mayan people over there. And now, alhamdulillah, we have a masjid there, and him and his family live on the top level. And the masjid is open 24/7. And when I went there, I met brothers from, believe it or not, from all parts of Africa that were visiting Mexico, Paris, UK, the Caribbean. I mean, just all over. And one thing beautiful about these masjids is that, unlike masjids in America and the UK and other places where they're not divided by culture. Like, you find everybody, because they're so small that you have to know who's a Muslim. Like, you want to know who's a Muslim. And so you feel that, you get those, like, Darul Arqam vibes, right? Like, this is how it was back in the days, where everybody from any background, one rich guy, one tourist who's rich, one guy who's simple, one guy who's a worker. It's just, and you're all happy to see each other because you don't know other Muslims. You only know them. Like, so you feel so happy. You feel like, it's kind of weird. It's like, I equate it to like, when you go somewhere and you find someone from your ethnic background, that happiness you feel, it's the same thing you feel when you go to a masjid like this, when you find another Muslim.
Yeah. No, I love that feeling too. When you're just going to some random place and you just find another Muslim.
You're musafir, right?
Yeah, and you find another Muslim. Yeah. Man, that just makes your travel, no matter how bitter the travel was.
And that bond is something that never goes away. You remember that that person you meet in that circumstance, you'll remember them for the rest of your life.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, amazing, man.
Habeeb, it's been a pleasure talking to you this afternoon. I have so many more questions for you. Is there anything you want to close off the show with, making sure that we didn't miss anything?
He's going to be back on again, inshallah, don't worry. But how would you close the show? Sorry.
Just Jazakallah khairan for inviting me, and again, keep doing what you're doing. Definitely a supporter and a fan of the show for many years. We'll continue to support. And it's been really enjoyable.
I have one quick question for you. Is Tottenham making the top 4 this year?
You're speaking about Tottenham. Yeah, we are, inshallah. We're gonna go for. We might win the Premier League. But that's never.
Okay, but is that you think Tottenham's gonna win the Premier League? You're gonna keep Harry Kane and you're gonna win the Premier League? Is that you saying it right now?
I'm probably the most delusional Tottenham fan. I've just got so much like. So I always support my team through thick and thin. I've been a long-suffering Tottenham fan for 30 years. We're gonna get the top 4 inshallah.
Yeah, I don't think we appreciate your sense of humor. By the way, anyone listening has to follow Habeeb on Instagram. Your memes, especially I was showing some of your memes, and he's got a lot. Like, there's this Kermit the Frog one where like he's getting soaked. There's some funny memes going on there.
Habeeb, what's the best way for people to reach out to you or connect with you on social media?
Yeah, so if you want to Instagram, my name is Habeeb_Akande, or you can, if you're interested in any of my courses, I've recently set up an institute where I'll go into more detail with courses on Islamic sexology and African intimacy. So that's on Eritology Institute, so you can check that out. But again, if you want to reach out to me personally, you can DM me on Instagram. I've got a sharp tongue, so if you're going to come back with some disrespectful comments, I'll fire back. I don't give any fatwa, but I definitely will kind of forward you on if you're looking for some help on certain issues. But but Jazakallah khairan again for inviting me.
Man, this is beautiful.
Please hang on after the show. I'm going to wrap this up. Well, for questions, you guys can always send a comment in the comment section below, and always reach out to us at themadbumlukes@gmail.com. Make sure you throw a comment in the comment section below. Click like and subscribe if you haven't done already. For my co-hosts, Mort, Maheen, Amir, my name is Sim. We'll see you all next time. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.